This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey, Chapter 13. How long Duane was traveling out of that region he never knew. But he reached familiar country and found a rancher who had before befriended him. Here his arm was attended to. He had food and sleep, and in a couple of weeks he was himself again. When the time came for Duane to ride away on his endless trail, his friend reluctantly imparted the information that some 30 miles south, near the village of Shirley, there was posted at a certain crossroad a reward for Buck Duane, dead or alive. Duane had heard of such notices, but he'd never seen one. His friend's reluctance and refusal to state for what particular deed this reward was offered roused Duane's curiosity. He had never been any closer to Shirley than this rancher's home. Doubtless some post office burglary, some gun-shooting scrape had been attributed to him, and he had been accused of worse deeds. Abruptly, Duane decided to ride over there and find out who wanted him dead or alive, and why. As he started south on the road, he reflected that this was the first time he had ever deliberately hunted trouble. Introspection awarded him this knowledge. During that last terrible flight on the lower Nueces, and while he lay abed recuperating, he had changed. A fixed, immutable, hopeless bitterness abided with him. He had reached the end of his rope. All the power of his mind and soul were unavailable to turn him back from his fate. That fate was to become an outlaw in every sense of the term, to be what he was credited with being, that is to say, to embrace evil. He had never committed a crime. He wondered now, was crime close to him? He reasoned finally that the desperation of crime had been forced upon him, if not its motive, and that if driven, there was no limit to his possibilities. He understood how many of the hitherto inexplicable actions of certain noted outlaws, why they had returned to the scene of the crime that had outlawed them, why they took such strangely fatal chances, why life was no more to them than a breath of wind, why they rode straight into the jaws of death to confront wronged men, or hunting rangers, vigilantes, to laugh in their very faces. It was such bitterness as this that drove these men. Toward afternoon, from the top of a long hill, Duane saw the green fields and trees and shining roofs of a town he considered must be Shirley. And at the bottom of the hill he came upon an intersecting road. There was a placard nailed on the crossroad signpost. Duane drew rein near it and leaned close to read the faded print. $1,000 reward for Buck Duane, dead or alive. Peering closer to read the finer, more faded print, Duane learned that he was wanted for the murder of Mrs. Jeff Aiken at her ranch near Shirley. The month September was named, but the date was illegible. The reward was offered by the woman's husband, whose name appeared with that of a sheriff's at the bottom of the placard. Duane read the thing twice. When he straightened, he was sick with the horror of his fate, wild with passion at those misguided fools who could believe that he had harmed a woman. Then he remembered Kate Bland, and as always when she returned to him, he quaked inwardly. Years before, word had gone abroad that he had killed her, and so it was easy for men wanting to fix a crime to name him. Perhaps it had been done often. Probably he bore on his shoulders a burden of numberless crimes. A dark, passionate fury possessed him. It shook him like a storm shakes the oak. When it passed, leaving him cold, with clouded brow and piercing eye, his mind was set. Spurring his horse, he rode straight toward the village. Shirley appeared to be a large, pretentious country town. A branch of some railroad terminated there. The main street was wide, bordered by trees and commodious houses, and many of the stores were of brick. A large plaza shaded by giant cottonwood trees occupied a central location. Duane pulled his running horse and halted him, plunging and snorting, before a group of idle men who lounged on benches in the shade of a spreading cottonwood. How many times had Duane seen just that kind of lazy, shirt-sleeved Texas group? Not often, however, had he seen such placid, lolling, good-natured men change their expression, their attitude, so swiftly. His advent apparently was momentous. They evidently took him for an unusual visitor. As far as Duane could tell, not one of them recognized him, had a hint of his identity. He slid off his horse and threw the bridle. "I'm Buck Duane," he said. "I saw that placard out there on a signpost. It's a damn lie. Somebody find this man Jeff Aiken. I want to see him." His announcement was taken in absolute silence. That was the only effect he noted, for he avoided looking at these villagers. The reason was simple enough. Duane felt himself overcome with emotion. There were tears in his eyes. He sat down on a bench, put his elbows on his knees and his hands to his face. For once, he had absolutely no concern for his fate. This ignominy was the last straw. Presently, however, he became aware of some kind of commotion among these villagers. He heard whisperings, low, hoarse voices, then the shuffle of rapid feet moving away. All at once a violent hand jerked his gun from its holster. When Duane rose, a gaunt man, livid of face, shaking like a leaf, confronted him with his own gun. "Hands up thar, you Buck Duane!" he roared, waving the gun. That appeared to be the cue for pandemonium to break loose. Duane opened his lips to speak, but if he had yelled at the top of his lungs, he could not have made himself heard. In weary disgust, he looked at the gaunt man, and then at the others, who were working themselves into a frenzy. He made no move, however, to hold up his hands. The villagers surrounded him, emboldened by finding him now unarmed. Then several men laid hold of his arms and pinioned them behind his back. Resistance was useless, even if Duane had had the spirit. Some one of them fetched his halter from his saddle, and with this they bound him helpless. People were running now from the street, the stores, the houses. Old men, cowboys, clerks, boys, ranchers came on the trot. The crowd grew. The increasing clamor began to attract women as well as men. A group of girls ran up, then hung back in fright and pity. The presence of cowboys made a difference. They split up the crowd, got to Duane, and lay hold of him with rough, businesslike hands. One of them lifted his fist and roared at the frenzied mob to fall back, to stop the racket. He beat them back into a circle. But it was some little time before the hubbub quieted down so a voice could be heard. "Shut up, will you all?" he was yelling. "Give us a chance to hear something. Easy now. Soho, there ain't nobody going to be hurt. That's right. Everybody quiet now. Let's see what's come off." This cowboy, evidently one of authority, or at least one of strong personality, turned to the gaunt man who still waved Duane's gun. "Abe, put the gun down," he said. "It might go off. Here, give it to me. Now, what's wrong? Who's this roped gent and what's he done?" The gaunt fellow, who appeared now about to collapse, lifted a shaking hand and pointed. "That there feller, he's Buck Duane," he panted. An angry murmur ran through the surrounding crowd. "The rope! The rope! Throw it over a branch! String him up!" cried an excited villager. "Buck Duane! Buck Duane! Hang him!" The cowboy silenced these cries. "Abe, how do you know this fella is Buck Duane?" he asked sharply. "Why, he said so," replied the man called Abe. "What?" came the exclamation incredulously. "It's a tarnal fact. panted Abe, waving his hands importantly. He was an old man and appeared to be carried away with the significance of his deed. He liked to rid his hoss right over us all. Then he jumped off, says he was Buck Duane, and he wanted to see Jeff Aiken bad. This speech caused a second commotion as noisy, though not so enduring as the first. When the cowboy, assisted by a couple of his mates, had restored order again, someone had slipped the noose end of Duane's rope over his head. "Up with him!" screeched a wild-eyed youth. The mob surged closer and was shoved back by the cowboys. "Abe, if you ain't drunk or crazy, tell that over," ordered Abe's interlocutor. With some show of resentment and more of dignity, Abe reiterated his former statement. "If he's Buck Duane, how in hell did you get hold of his gun?" bluntly queried the cowboy. "Why, he's set down thar, and he kind of hid his face on his hand, and I grabbed his gun and got the drop on him." What the cowboy thought of this was expressed in a laugh. His mates likewise grinned broadly. Then the leader turned to Duane. "Stranger, I reckon you better speak up for yourself," he said. That stilled the crowd as no command had done. "I'm Buck Duane, all right," said Duane quietly. "It was this way." The big cowboy seemed to vibrate with a shock. All the ruddy warmth left his face. His jaw began to bulge. The corded veins in his neck stood out in knots. In an instant he had a hard, stern, strange look. He shot out a powerful hand that fastened in the front of Duane's blouse. "Something queer here, but if you're Duane, you're sure in bad. Any fool ought to know that. You mean it, then?" "Yes." "Rode in to shoot up the town, eh? Some old stunt of you gunfighters? Meant to kill the man who offered a reward? Wanted to see Jeff Aiken bad, huh?" "No," replied Duane. "Your citizen here misrepresented things. He seems a little off his head." "Reckon he is. Somebody is, that's sure. You claim Buck Duane, then, and all his doings?" "I'm Duane, yes, but I won't stand for the blame of things I never did. That's why I'm here. I saw that placard out there offering the reward. Until now, I never was within a half-day's ride of this town. I'm blamed for what I never did. I rode in here, told who I was, asked somebody to send for Jeff Aiken. And then you sat down and let this old guy throw your own gun on you?" queried the cowboy in amazement. "I guess that's it," replied Duane. "Well, it's powerful strange if you're really Buck Duane." A man elbowed his way into the circle. "It's Duane. I recognize him. I've seen him in more'n one place," he said. "Cybert, you can rely on what I tell you. I don't know if he's locoed or what, but I do know he's the genuine Buck Duane. Anyone who'd ever seen him once would never forget him." "What do you want to see Aiken for?" asked the cowboy Cybert. "I want to face him and tell him I never harmed his wife." "Why?" "Because I'm innocent, that's all." "Suppose we send for Aiken and he hears you and doesn't believe you. What then?" "If he won't believe me, why, then my case is so bad I'd be better off dead." A momentary silence was broken by Cybert. "If this isn't a queer deal, boys, reckon we better send for Jeff." "Somebody went for him. He'll be coming soon," replied a man. Duane stood a head taller than that circle of curious faces. He gazed out above and beyond them. It was in this way that he chanced to see a number of women on the outskirts of the crowd. Some were old, with hard faces like the men. Some were young and comely, and most of these seemed agitated by excitement or distress. They cast fearful, pitying glances upon Duane as he stood there with that noose round his neck. Women were more human than men, Duane thought. He met eyes that dilated, seemed fascinated at his gaze, but were not averted. It was the old women who were voluble, loud in expression of their feelings. Near the trunk of the cottonwood stood a slender woman in white. Duane's wandering glance rested upon her. Her eyes were riveted upon him. A soft-hearted woman, probably, who did not want to see him hanged. "Dar comes Jeff Aiken now," called a man loudly. The crowd shifted and trampled in eagerness. Duane saw two men coming fast, one of whom, in the lead, was of stalwart build. He had a gun in his hand, and his manner was that of fierce energy. The cowboy Seibert thrust open the jostling circle of men. "Hold on, Jeff," he called, and he blocked the man with the gun. He spoke so low Duane could not hear what he said, and his form hid Aiken's face. At that juncture the crowd spread out, closed in, and Aiken and Seibert were caught in the circle. There was a pushing forward, a pressing of many bodies, hoarse cries and flinging hands. Again the insane tumult was about to break out. The demand for an outlaw's blood, the call for a wild justice executed 1,000 times before on Texas's bloody soil. Seibert bellowed at the dark encroaching mass. The cowboys with him beat and cuffed in vain. "Jeff, will you listen?" broke in Seibert hurriedly, his hand on the other man's arm. Aiken nodded coolly. Duane, who had seen many men in perfect control of themselves under circumstances like these, recognized the spirit that dominated Aiken. He was white, cold, passionless. There were lines of bitter grief deep round his lips. If Duane ever felt the meaning of death, he felt it then. "Sure this is your game, Aiken," said Seibert. "But hear me a minute. Reckon there's no doubt about this man being Buck Duane. He's seen the placard out at the crossroads. He rides into Shirley. He says he's Buck Duane and he's looking for Jeff Aiken. That's all clear enough. You know how these gunfighters go looking for trouble. But here's what stumps me. Duane sits down there on the bench and lets old Abe Strickland grab his gun and get the drop on him. More than that, he gives me some strange talk about how, if he couldn't make you believe he's innocent, he'd better be dead. You see for yourself, Duane ain't drunk or crazy or locoed. He doesn't strike me as a man who rode in here hunting blood. So I reckon you better hold on till you hear what he has to say." Then for the first time the drawn-faced, hungry-eyed giant turned his gaze upon Duane. He had intelligence which was not yet subservient to passion. Moreover, he seemed the kind of man Duane would care to have judge him in a critical moment like this. "Listen," said Duane gravely, with his eyes steady on Aiken's. "I'm Buck Duane. I never lied to any man in my life. I was forced into outlawry. I never had a chance to leave the country. I've killed men to save my own life. I never intentionally harmed any woman. I rode 30 miles today, deliberately, to see what this reward was, who made it, what for. When I read the placard, I went sick to the bottom of my soul. So I rode in here to find you, to tell you this. I never saw Shirley before today. It was impossible for me to have killed your wife. Last September I was 200 miles north of here on the upper Nueces. I can prove that. Men who know me will tell you I couldn't murder a woman. I haven't any idea why such a deed should be laid at my hands. It's just that wild border gossip. I have no idea what reasons you have for holding me responsible. I only know you're wrong. You've been deceived. And see here, Aiken, you understand I'm a miserable man. I'm about broken, I guess. I don't care any more for life, for anything. If you can't look me in the eyes, man to man, and believe what I say, why, by God, you can kill me." Aiken heaved a great breath.
Buck Duane, whether I'm impressed or not by what you say needn't matter. You've had accusers, justly or unjustly, as will soon appear. The thing is, we can prove you innocent or guilty. My girl Lucy saw my wife's assailant.
He motioned for the crowd of men to open up.
Somebody, you, Seibert, go for Lucy. That'll settle this thing.
Duane heard as a man in an ugly dream. The faces around him, the hum of voices, all seemed far off. His life hung by the merest thread. Yet he did not think of that so much as of the brand of a woman murderer which might soon be sealed upon him by a frightened, imaginative child. The crowd trooped apart and closed in again. Duane caught a blurred image of a slight girl clinging to Seibert's hand. He could not see distinctly. Aiken lifted the child, whispered soothingly to her not to be afraid. Then he fetched her closer to Duane.
Lucy, tell me, did you ever see this man before?
Asked Aiken, huskily and low.
Is he the one who came in the house that day, struck you down, and dragged Mama?
Aiken's voice failed. A lightning flash seemed to clear Duane's blurred sight. He saw a pale, sad face and violet eyes fixed in gloom and horror upon his. No terrible moment in Duane's life ever equaled this one of silence, of suspense.
"It ain't him,"
cried the child. Then Seibert was flinging the noose off Duane's neck and unwinding the bonds round his arms. The spellbound crowd awoke to hoarse exclamations. "See there, my locoed gents, how easy you'd hang the wrong man," burst out the cowboy as he made the rope end hiss. "You all are a lot of wise rangers, haw-haw." He freed Duane and thrust the bone-handled gun back in Duane's holster. "You aid there. Reckon you pulled a stunt. But don't try the like again. And, men, I'll gamble there's a hell of a lot of bad work Buck Duane's named for, which all he never done. Clear away there. Where's his hoss? Duane, the road's open out of Shirley." Seibert swept the gaping watchers aside and pressed Duane toward the horse, which another cowboy held. Mechanically, Duane mounted, felt a lift as he went up. Then the cowboy's hard face softened in a smile. "I reckon it ain't uncivil of me to say, hit that road quick," he said frankly. He led the horse out of the crowd. Aiken joined him, and between them they escorted Duane across the plaza. The crowd appeared irresistibly drawn to follow. Aiken paused with his big hand on Duane's knee. In it, unconsciously probably, he still held the gun.
"Duane, a word with you," he said. "I believe you're not so black as you've been painted. I wish there was time to say more. Tell me this anyway. Do you know the ranger Captain McNelly?"
"I do not," replied Duane in surprise.
"I met him only a week ago over in Fairfield," went on Aiken hurriedly. "He declared you never killed my wife. I didn't believe him. Argued with him. We almost had hard words over it. Now, I'm sorry. The last thing he said was, if you ever see Duane, don't kill him. Send him into my camp after dark. He meant something strange. What, I can't say. But he was right, and I was wrong. If Lucy had batted an eye, I'd have killed you. Still, I wouldn't advise you to hunt up McNelly's camp. He's clever. Maybe he believes there's no treachery in his new ideas of ranger tactics. I tell you for all it's worth. Goodbye. May God help you further as he did this day."
Duane said goodbye and touched the horse with his spurs. "So long, Buck," called Seibert with that frank smile breaking warm over his brown face, and he held his sombrero high. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey, Chapter 14. When Duane reached the crossing of the roads, the name Fairfield on the signpost seemed to be the thing that tipped the oscillating balance of decision in favor of that direction. He answered here to unfathomable impulse. If he had been driven to hunt up Jeff Aiken, now he was called to find this unknown ranger captain. In Duane's state of mind, clear reasoning, common sense, or keenness were out of the question. He went because he felt he was compelled. Dusk had fallen when he rode into a town which inquiry discovered to be Fairfield. Captain McNally's camp was stationed just out of the village limits on the other side. No one except the boy Duane questioned appeared to notice his arrival. Like Shirley, the town of Fairfield was large and prosperous, compared to the innumerable hamlets dotting the vast extent of southwestern Texas. As Duane rode through, being careful to get off the main street, he heard the tolling of a church bell that was a melancholy reminder of his old home. There did not appear to be any camp on the outskirts of the town, but as Duane sat his horse, peering round and undecided what further move to make, he caught the glint of flickering lights through the darkness. Heading toward them, he rode perhaps a quarter of a mile to come upon a grove of mesquite. The brightness of several fires made the surrounding darkness all the blacker. Duane saw the moving forms of men and heard horses. He advanced naturally, expecting any moment to be halted. "Who goes there?" came the sharp call out of the gloom. Duane pulled his horse. The gloom was impenetrable. "One man, alone," replied Duane. "A stranger?" "Yes." "What do you want?" "I'm trying to find the ranger camp." "You struck it. What's your errand?" "I want to see Captain McNally." "Get down and advance. Slow. Don't move your hands. It's dark, but I can see." Duane dismounted and, leading his horse, slowly advanced a few paces. He saw a dully bright object, a gun, before he discovered the man who held it. A few more steps showed a dark figure blocking the trail. Here Duane halted. "Come closer, stranger. Let's have a look at you," the guard ordered curtly. Duane advanced again until he stood before the man. Here the rays of light from the fires flickered upon Duane's face. "Reckon you're a stranger, all right. What's your name and your business with the captain?" Duane hesitated, pondering what best to say. "Tell Captain McNally I'm the man he's been asking to ride into his camp after dark," finally said Duane. The ranger bent forward to peer hard at this night visitor. His manner had been alert, and now it became tense. "Come here, one of you men, quick," he called, without turning in the least toward the campfire. "Hello, what's up, Pickens?" came the swift reply. It was followed by a rapid thud of boots on soft ground. A dark form crossed the gleams from the firelight. Then a ranger loomed up to reach the side of the guard. Duane heard whispering, the purport of which he could not catch. The second ranger swore under his breath. Then he turned away and started back. "Here, Ranger, before you go, understand this. My visit is peaceful, friendly if you'll let it be. Mind, I was asked to come here after dark." Duane's clear, penetrating voice carried far. The listening rangers at the campfire heard what he said. "No, Pickens, tell that fellow to wait," replied an authoritative voice. Then a slim figure detached itself from the dark, moving group at the campfire and hurried out. "Better be foxy, Cap," shouted a ranger in warning. "Shut up, all of you," was the reply. This officer, obviously Captain McNally, soon joined the two rangers who were confronting Duane. He had no fear. He strode straight up to Duane. "I'm McNally," he said. "If you're my man, don't mention your name yet." All this seemed so strange to Duane, in keeping with much that had happened lately. "I met Jeff Aiken today," said Duane. "He sent me." "You've met Aiken!" exclaimed McNally, sharp, eager, low. "By all that's bully!" Then he appeared to catch himself, to grow restrained. "Men, fall back. Leave us alone a moment." The rangers slowly withdrew. "Buck Duane, it's you," he whispered eagerly. "Yes." "If I give my word you'll not be arrested, you'll be treated fairly, will you come into camp and consult with me?" "Certainly." "Duane, I'm sure glad to meet you," went on McNally, and he extended his hand. Amazed and touched, scarcely realizing this actuality, Duane gave his hand and felt the unmistakable grip of warmth. "It doesn't seem natural, Captain McNally, but I believe I'm glad to meet you," said Duane soberly. "You will be. Now we'll go back to camp. Keep your identity mum for the present." He led Duane in the direction of the campfire. "Pickens, go back on duty," he ordered. "And Beeson, you look after this horse." When Duane got beyond the line of mesquite, which had hid a good view of the campsite, he saw a group of perhaps 15 rangers sitting around the fires, near a long, low shed where horses were feeding, and a small adobe house at one side. "We've just had grub, but I'll see you get some. Then we'll talk," said McNally. "I've taken up temporary quarters here. Have a rustler job on hand. Now, when you've eaten, come right into the house." Duane was hungry, but he hurried through the ample supper that was set before him, urged on by curiosity and astonishment. The only way he could account for his presence there in a ranger's camp was that McNally hoped to get useful information out of him. Still, that would hardly have made this captain so eager. There was a mystery here, and Duane could scarcely wait for it to be solved. While eating, he had bent keen eyes around him. After a first quiet scrutiny, the rangers apparently paid no more attention to him. They were all veterans in service, Duane saw that, and rugged, powerful men of iron constitution. Despite the occasional joke and sally of the more youthful members, and a general conversation of campfire nature, Duane was not deceived about the fact that his advent had been an unusual and striking one, which had caused an undercurrent of conjecture and even consternation among them. These rangers were too well trained to appear openly curious about their captain's guest. If they had not deliberately attempted to be oblivious of his presence, Duane would have concluded they thought him an ordinary visitor, somehow of use to McNally. As it was, Duane felt a suspense that must have been due to a hint of his identity. He was not long in presenting himself at the door of the house. "Come in and have a chair," said McNally, motioning for the one other occupant of the room to rise. "Leave us, Russell, and close the door. I'll be through these reports right off." McNally sat at a table, upon which was a lamp and various papers. Seen in the light, he was a fine-looking, soldierly man of about 40 years, dark-haired and dark-eyed, with a bronzed face, shrewd, stern, strong, yet not wanting in kindliness. He scanned hastily over some papers, fussed with them, and finally put them in envelopes. Without looking up, he pushed a cigar case toward Duane, and upon Duane's refusal to smoke, he took a cigar, rose to light it at the lamp chimney, and then, settling back in his chair, he faced Duane, making a vain attempt to hide what must have been the fulfillment of a long-nourished curiosity. "Duane, I've been hoping for this for 2 years," he began. Duane smiled a little, a smile that felt strange on his face. He had never been much of a talker, and speech here seemed more than ordinarily difficult. McNally must have felt that. He looked long and earnestly at Duane, and his quick, nervous manner changed to grave thoughtfulness. "I've lots to say, but where to begin?" he mused. "Duane, you've had a hard life since you went on the dodge. I never met you before, don't know what you look like as a boy, but I can see even ranger life isn't all roses." He rolled his cigar between his lips and puffed clouds of smoke. "Ever hear from home since you left Wellston?" he asked abruptly. "No." "Never a word?" "Not one," replied Duane sadly. "That's tough. I'm glad to be able to tell you that up to just lately your mother, sister, uncle, all your folks, I believe, were well. I've kept posted, but haven't heard lately." Duane averted his face a moment, hesitated till the swelling left his throat, and then said, "It's worth what I went through today to hear that." "I can imagine how you feel about it. When I was in the war, but let's get down to the business of this meeting." He pulled his chair close to Duane's. "You've had word more than once in the last 2 years that I wanted to see you?" "3 times, I remember," replied Duane. "Why didn't you hunt me up?" "I supposed you imagined me one of those gunfighters who couldn't take a dare and expected me to ride up to your camp and be arrested." "That was natural, I suppose," went on McNally. "You didn't know me, otherwise you would have come. I've been a long time getting to you, but the nature of my job, as far as you're concerned, made me cautious. Duane, you're aware of the hard name you bear all over the Southwest?" "Once in a while I'm jarred into realizing," replied Duane. "It's the hardest, barring Murrell and Cheseldine on the Texas border. But there's this difference. Murrell in his day was known to deserve his infamous name. Cheseldine in his day also. But I've found hundreds of men in southwest Texas who are your friends, who swear you never committed a crime. The farther south I get, the clearer this becomes. What I want to know is the truth. Have you ever done anything criminal? Tell me the truth, Duane. It won't make any difference in my plan. And when I say crime, I mean what I would call crime, or any reasonable Texan." "That way, my hands are clean," replied Duane. "You never held up a man, robbed a store for grub, stole a horse when you needed him bad? Never anything like that?" "Somehow I always kept out of that, just when pressed the hardest." "Duane, I'm damn glad," McNally exclaimed, gripping Duane's hand. "Glad for your mother's sake. But all the same, in spite of this, you are a Texas outlaw accountable to the state. You're perfectly aware that under existing circumstances, if you fell into the hands of the law, you'd probably hang, at least go to jail for a long term." "That's what kept me on the dodge all these years," replied Duane. "Certainly." McNally removed his cigar. His eyes narrowed and glittered. The muscles along his brown cheeks set hard and tense. He leaned closer to Duane, laid sinewy, pressing fingers upon Duane's knee. "Listen to this," he whispered hoarsely. "If I place a pardon in your hand, make you a free, honest citizen once more, clear your name of infamy, make your mother, your sister proud of you, will you swear yourself to a service, any service I demand of you?" Duane sat stock still, stunned. Slowly, more persuasively, with show of earnest agitation, Captain McNally reiterated his startling query. "My God!" burst from Duane. "What's this? McNally, you can't be in earnest." "Never more so in my life. I've a deep game. I'm playing it square. What do you say?" He rose to his feet. Duane, as if impelled, rose with him. Ranger and outlaw then locked eyes that searched each other's souls. In McNally's Duane read truth, strong, fiery purpose, hope, even gladness, and a fugitive mounting assurance of victory. Twice Duane endeavored to speak, failed of all save a hoarse, incoherent sound, until, forcing back a flood of speech, he found a voice. "Any service?" "Every service. McNally, I give my word," said Duane. A light played over McNally's face, warming out all the grim darkness. He held out his hand. Duane met it with his in a clasp that men unconsciously give in moments of stress. When they unclasped and Duane stepped back to drop into a chair, McNally fumbled for another cigar. He had bitten the other into shreds, and, lighting it as before, he turned to his visitor, now calm and cool. He had the look of a man who had justly won something at considerable cost. His next move was to take a long leather case from his pocket and extract from it several folded papers. "Here's your pardon from the governor," he said quietly. "You'll see when you look it over that it's conditional. When you sign this paper I have here, the condition will be met." He smoothed out the paper, handed Duane a pen, ran his forefinger along a dotted line. Duane's hand was shaky. Years had passed since he had held a pen. It was with difficulty that he achieved his signature. Buckley Duane. How strange the name looked. "Right here ends the career of Buck Duane, outlaw and gunfighter," said McNally, and, seating himself, he took the pen from Duane's fingers and wrote several lines in several places upon the paper. Then, with a smile, he handed it to Duane. "That makes you a member of Company A, Texas Rangers." "So that's it!" burst out Duane, a light breaking in upon his bewilderment. "You want me for Ranger service?" "Sure, that's it," replied the captain dryly. "Now to hear what that service is to be. I've been a busy man since I took this job, and as you may have heard, I've done a few things. I don't mind telling you that political influence put me in here, and that up Austin way there's a good deal of friction in the Department of State in regard to whether or not the Ranger service is any good, whether it should be discontinued or not. I'm on the party side who's defending the Ranger service. I contend that it's made Texas habitable. Well, it's been up to me to produce results. So far, I have been successful. My great ambition is to break up the outlaw gangs along the river. I have never ventured in there yet because I've been waiting to get the lieutenant I needed. You, of course, are the man I had in mind. It's my idea to start way up the Rio Grande and begin with Cheseldine. He's the strongest, the worst outlaw of the times. He's more than rustler. It's Cheseldine and his gang who are operating on the banks. They're doing bank robbing. That's my private opinion, but it's not been backed up by any evidence. Cheseldine doesn't leave evidences. He's intelligent, cunning. No one seems to have seen him, to know what he looks like. I assume, of course, that you are a stranger to the country he dominates. It's 500 miles west of your ground. There's a little town over there called Fairdale. It's the nest of a rustler gang. They rustle and murder at will. Nobody knows who the leader is. I want you to find out. Well, whatever way you decide is best, you will proceed to act upon. You are your own boss. You know such men and how they can be approached. You will take all the time needed, if it's months. It will be necessary for you to communicate with me, and that will be a difficult matter. For Cheseldine dominates several whole counties. You must find some way to let me know when I and my rangers are needed. The plan is to break up Cheseldine's gang. It's the toughest job on the border. Arresting him alone isn't to be heard of. He couldn't be brought out. Killing him isn't much better, for his select men, the ones he operates with, are as dangerous to the community as he is. We want to kill or jail this choice selection of robbers and break up the rest of the gang. To find them, to get among them somehow, to learn their movements, to lay your trap for us rangers to spring. That, Duane, is your service to me, and God knows it's a great one."
"I have accepted it," replied Duane.
"Your work will be secret. You are now a ranger in my service, but no one except the few I choose to tell will know of it until we pull off the job. You will simply be Buck Duane till it suits our purpose to acquaint Texas with the fact that you're a ranger. You'll see there's no date on that paper. No one will ever know just when you entered the service. Perhaps we can make it appear that all or most of your outlawry has really been good service to the state. At that, I believe it'll turn out so." McNally paused a moment in his rapid talk, chewed his cigar, drew his brows together in a dark frown, and went on. "No man on the border knows so well as you the deadly nature of this service. It's 1,000 to 1 that you'll be killed. I'd say there was no chance at all for any other man besides you. Your reputation will go far among the outlaws. Maybe that and your nerve and your gunplay will pull you through. I'm hoping so. But it's a long, long chance against your ever coming back."
"That's not the point," said Duane. "But in case I get killed out there, what—"
"Leave that to me," interrupted Captain McNally. "Your folks will know at once of your pardon and your ranger duty. If you lose your life out there, I'll see your name cleared. The service you render, known. You can rest assured of that."
"I am satisfied," replied Duane.
"That's so much more than I dared to hope." "Well, it's settled then. I'll give you money for expenses. You'll start as soon as you like. The sooner, the better. I hope to think of other suggestions, especially about communicating with me." Long after the lights were out and the low hum of voices had ceased round the campfire, Duane lay wide awake, eyes staring into the blackness, marveling over the strange events of the day. He was humble, grateful to the depths of his soul. A huge and crushing burden had been lifted from his heart. He welcomed this hazardous service to the man who had saved him. Thought of his mother and sister and Uncle Jim, of his home, of old friends came rushing over him, the first time in years that he had had happiness in the memory. The disgrace he had put upon them would now be removed, and in the light of that, his wasted life of the past, and its probable tragic end in future service as atonement changed their aspects. And as he lay there, with the approach of sleep finally dimming the vividness of his thought, so full of mystery, shadowy faces floated in the blackness around him, haunting him as he had always been haunted. It was broad daylight when he awakened. McNally was calling him to breakfast. Outside sounded voices of men, crackling of fires, snorting and stamping of horses, the barking of dogs. Duane rolled out of his blankets and made good use of the soap and towel and razor and brush nearby on a bench, things of rare luxury to an outlaw on the ride. The face he saw in the mirror was as strange as the past he had tried so hard to recall. Then he stepped to the door and went out. The rangers were eating in a circle round a tarpaulin spread upon the ground. "Fellows," said McNally, "shake hands with Buck Duane. He's on secret ranger service for me. Service that'll likely make you all hump soon. Mind you, keep mum about it." The rangers surprised Duane with a roaring greeting, the warmth of which he soon divined was divided between pride of his acquisition to their ranks and eagerness to meet that violent service of which their captain hinted. They were jolly, wild fellows, with just enough gravity in their welcome to show Duane their respect and appreciation, while not forgetting his lone wolf record. When he had seated himself in that circle, now one of them, a feeling subtle and uplifting pervaded him. After the meal, Captain McNally drew Duane aside. "Here's the money. Make it go as far as you can. Better strike straight for El Paso. Sneak around there and hear things. Then go to Valentine. That's near the river and within 50 miles or so of the edge of the rimrock. Somewhere up there, Cheseldine holds fort. Somewhere to the north is the town Fairdale, but he doesn't hide all the time in the rocks, only after some daring raid or hold-up. Cheseldine's got border towns on his staff, or scared of him, and these places we want to know about, especially Fairdale. Write me care of the adjutant at Austin. I don't have to warn you to be careful where you mail letters. Ride 100, 200 miles if necessary, or go clear to El Paso. McNelly stopped with an air of finality, and then Duane slowly rose. I'll start at once, he said, extending his hand to the captain. I'd like to thank you. Hell, man, don't thank me, replied McNelly, crushing the proffered hand. I've sent a lot of good men to their deaths, and maybe you're another. But, as I've said, you've one chance in 1,000, and by heaven, I'd hate to be Cheseldine or any other man you were trailing. No, not goodbye. Adios, Duane. May we meet again. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey, Book 2, The Ranger, Chapter 15. West of the Pecos River, Texas extended a vast wild region, barren in the north where the Llano Estacado spread its shifting sands, fertile in the south along the Rio Grande. A railroad marked an undeviating course across 500 miles of this country, and the only villages and towns lay on or near this line of steel. Unsettled as was this western Texas, and despite the acknowledged dominance of the outlaw bands, the pioneers pushed steadily into it. First had come the lone rancher, then his neighbors in near and far valleys, then the hamlets, at last the railroad and the towns. And still the pioneers came, spreading deeper into the valleys, farther and wider over the plains. It was mesquite-dotted, cactus-covered desert, but rich soil upon which water acted like magic. There was little grass to an acre, but there were millions of acres. The climate was wonderful. Cattle flourished and ranchers prospered. The Rio Grande flowed almost due south along the western boundary for 1,000 miles, and then, weary of its course, turned abruptly north to make what was called the Big Bend. The railroad, running west, cut across this bend, and all that country bounded on the north by the railroad and on the south by the river was as wild as the Staked Plains. It contained not one settlement. Across the face of this Big Bend, as if to isolate it, stretched the Ord mountain range, of which Mount Ord, Cathedral Mount, and Elephant Mount raised bleak peaks above their fellows. In the valleys of the foothills and out across the plains were ranches, and farther north villages and the towns of Alpine and Marfa. Like other parts of the great Lone Star State, this section of Texas was a world in itself, a world where the riches of the rancher were ever enriching the outlaw. The village closest to the gateway of this outlaw-infested region was a little place called Ord, named after the dark peak that looms some miles to the south. It had been settled originally by Mexicans. There were still the ruins of adobe missions, but with the advent of the rustler and outlaw, many inhabitants were shot or driven away, so that at the height of Ord's prosperity and evil sway there were but few Mexicans living there, and these had their choice between holding hand in glove with the outlaws or furnishing target practice for that wild element. Toward the close of a day in September, a stranger rode into Ord, and in a community where all men were remarkable for one reason or another, he excited interest. His horse, perhaps, received the first and most engaging attention, horses in that region being apparently more important than men. This particular horse did not attract with beauty. At first glance he seemed ugly, but he was a giant, black as coal, rough despite the care manifestly bestowed upon him, long of body, ponderous of limb, huge in every way. A bystander remarked that he had a grand head. True, if only his head had been seen, he would have been a beautiful horse. Like men, horses show what they are in the shape, the size, the line, the character of the head. This one denoted fire, speed, blood, loyalty, and his eyes were as soft and dark as a woman's. His face was solid black, except in the middle of his forehead, where there was a round spot of white.
"Say, mister, mind telling me his name?"
asked a ragged urchin, with born love of a horse in his eyes. "Bullet," replied the rider.
"That there's for the white mark, ain't it?"
whispered the youngster to another.
"Say, isn't he a whopper? Biggest hoss I ever seen."
Bullet carried a huge black silver-ornamented saddle of Mexican make, a lariat and canteen, and a small pack rolled into a tarpaulin. This rider apparently put all care of appearances upon his horse. His apparel was the ordinary jeans of the cowboy, without vanity, and it was torn and travel-stained. His boots showed evidence of an intimate acquaintance with cactus. Like his horse, this man was a giant in stature, but rangier, not so heavily built. Otherwise, the only striking thing about him was his somber face with its piercing eyes, and hair white over the temples. He packed 2 guns, both low down, but that was too common a thing to attract notice in the Big Bend. A close observer, however, would have noted a singular fact. This rider's right hand was more bronzed, more weather-beaten than his left. He never wore a glove on that right hand. He had dismounted before a ramshackle structure that bore upon its wide, high-boarded front the sign, "Hotel." There were horsemen coming and going down the wide street between its rows of old stores, saloons, and houses. Ord certainly did not look enterprising. Americans had manifestly assimilated much of the leisure of the Mexicans. The hotel had a wide platform in front, and this did duty as porch and sidewalk. Upon it, and leaning against a hitching rail, were men of varying ages, most of them slovenly in old jeans and slouched sombreros. Some were booted, belted, and spurred. No man there wore a coat, but all wore vests. The guns in that group would have outnumbered the men. It was a crowd seemingly too lazy to be curious. Good nature did not appear to be wanting, but it was not the frank and boisterous kind natural to the cowboy or rancher in town for a day. These men were idlers. What else, perhaps, was easy to conjecture. Certainly, to this arriving stranger, who flashed a keen eye over them, they wore an atmosphere never associated with work. Presently, a tall man, with a drooping sandy mustache, leisurely detached himself from the crowd.
"Howdy, stranger," he said.
The stranger had bent over to loosen the cinches. He straightened up and nodded. Then, "I'm thirsty." That brought a broad smile to faces. It was characteristic greeting. One and all trooped after the stranger into the hotel. It was a dark, ill-smelling barn of a place, with a bar as high as a short man's head. A bartender with a scarred face was serving drinks. "Line up, gents," said the stranger. They piled over one another to get to the bar, with coarse jests and oaths and laughter. None of them noted that the stranger did not appear so thirsty as he had claimed to be. In fact, though he went through the motions, he did not drink at all. My name's Jim Fletcher, said the tall man with the drooping, sandy mustache. He spoke laconically. Nevertheless, there was a tone that showed he expected to be known. Something went with that name. The stranger did not appear to be impressed. My name might be Blazes, but it ain't, he replied. What do you call this burg? Stranger, this here metropolis bears the handle Ord. Is that new to you? He leaned back against the bar, and now his little yellow eyes, clear as crystal, flawless as a hawk's, fixed on the stranger. Other men crowded close, forming a circle, curious, ready to be friendly or otherwise, according to how the tall interrogator marked the newcomer. Sure, Ord's a little strange to me. Off the railroad some, ain't it? Funny trails hereabouts. How fur was you going? I reckon I was going as far as I could, replied the stranger with a hard laugh. His reply had subtle reaction on that listening circle. Some of the men exchanged glances. Fletcher stroked his drooping mustache, seemed thoughtful, but lost something of that piercing scrutiny. Well, Ord's the jumping-off place, he said presently. Sure you've heard of the Big Bend country? I sure have, and was making tracks for it, replied the stranger. Fletcher turned toward a man in the outer edge of the group. Nell, come in here. This individual elbowed his way in and was seen to be scarcely more than a boy, almost pale beside these bronzed men, with a long, expressionless face, thin and sharp. Nell, this here's... Fletcher wheeled to the stranger. What'd you call yourself? I'd hate to mention what I've been calling myself lately. This sally fetched another laugh. The stranger appeared cool, careless, indifferent. Perhaps he knew, as the others present knew, that this show of Fletcher's, this pretense of introduction, was merely talk while he was looked over. Nell stepped up, and it was easy to see, from the way Fletcher relinquished his part in the situation, that a man greater than he had appeared upon the scene. Any business here? He queried curtly. When he spoke, his expressionless face was in strange contrast with the ring, the quality, the cruelty of his voice. This voice betrayed an absence of humor, of friendliness, of heart. Nope, replied the stranger. Know anybody hereabouts? Nary one. Just riding through? Yep. Sloping for back country, hey? There came a pause. The stranger appeared to grow a little resentful and drew himself up disdainfully. Well, considering you all seem so damn friendly and uncurious down here in this Big Bend country, I don't mind saying yes, I am in on the dodge, he replied with deliberate sarcasm. From west of Ord, out El Paso way, maybe? Sure. Ah, that's so. Nell's words cut the air, stilled the room. You're from way down the river. That's what they say down there, on the dodge. Stranger, you're a liar. With swift clink of spur and thump of boot, the crowd split, leaving Nell and the stranger in the center. Wild breed of that ilk never made a mistake in judging a man's nerve. Nell had cut out with the trenchant call and stood ready. The stranger suddenly lost his every resemblance to the rough and easy character before manifest in him. He became bronze. That situation seemed familiar to him. His eyes held a singular, piercing light that danced like a compass needle. Sure I lied, he said, so I ain't taking offense at the way you called me. I'm looking to make friends, not enemies. You don't strike me as one of them four-flushes, aching to kill somebody. But if you are, go ahead and open the ball. You see, I never throw a gun on them fellers till they go for theirs. Nell coolly eyed his antagonist, his strange face not changing in the least. Yet somehow it was evident in his look that here was metal which rang differently from what he had expected. Invited to start a fight or withdraw, as he chose, Nell proved himself big in the manner characteristic of only the genuine gunman. "Stranger, I pass," he said, and turning to the bar, he ordered liquor. The tension relaxed. The silence broke. The men filled up the gap. The incident seemed closed. Jim Fletcher attached himself to the stranger, and now both respect and friendliness tempered his asperity. "Well, for want of a better handle, I'll call you Dodge," he said. "Dodge is as good as any. Gents, line up again, and if you can't be friendly, be careful." Such was Buck Duane's debut in the little outlaw hamlet of Ord. Duane had been 3 months out of the Nueces country. At El Paso he bought the finest horse he could find, and, armed and otherwise outfitted to suit him, he had taken to unknown trails. Leisurely he rode from town to town, village to village, ranch to ranch, fitting his talk and his occupation to the impression he wanted to make upon different people whom he met. He was, in turn, a cowboy, a rancher, a cattleman, a stock buyer, a boomer, a land hunter, and long before he reached the wild and inhospitable Ord, he had acted the part of an outlaw, drifting into new territory. He passed on leisurely because he wanted to learn the lay of the country, the location of the villages and ranches, the work, habit, gossip, pleasures and fears of the people with whom he came in contact. The one subject most impelling to him, outlaws, he never mentioned, but by talking all around it, sifting the old ranch and cattle story, he acquired a knowledge calculated to aid his plot. In this game, time was of no moment. If necessary, he would take years to accomplish his task. The stupendous and perilous nature of it showed in the slow, wary preparation. When he heard Fletcher's name and faced Nell, he knew he had reached the place he sought. Ord was a hamlet on the fringe of the grazing country, of doubtful honesty, from which surely winding trails led down into that free and never-disturbed paradise of outlaws, the Big Bend. Duane made himself agreeable, yet not too much so, to Fletcher and several other men disposed to talk and drink and eat. And then, after having a care for his horse, he rode out of town a couple of miles to a grove he had marked, and there, well hidden, he prepared to spend the night. This proceeding served a double purpose. He was safer, and the habit would look well in the eyes of outlaws, who would be more inclined to see in him the lone wolf fugitive. Long since Duane had fought out a battle with himself, won a hard-earned victory. His outer life, the action, was much the same as it had been, but the inner life had tremendously changed. He could never become a happy man, he could never shake utterly those haunting phantoms that had once been his despair and madness, but he had assumed a task impossible for any man save one like him. He had felt the meaning of it grow strangely and wonderfully, and through that flourished up consciousness of how passionately he now clung to this thing which would blot out his former infamy. The iron fetters no more threatened his hands. The iron door no more haunted his dreams. He never forgot that he was free. Strangely, too, along with his feeling of new manhood, there gathered the force of imperious desire to run these chief outlaws to their dooms. He never called them outlaws, but rustlers, thieves, robbers, murderers, criminals. He sensed the growth of a relentless driving passion, and sometimes he feared that, more than the newly acquired zeal and pride in this ranger service, it was the old, terrible, inherited killing instinct lifting its hydra head in new guise. But of that he could not be sure. He dreaded the thought. He could only wait. Another aspect of the change in Duane, neither passionate nor driving, yet not improbably even more potent of new significance to life, was the imperceptible return of an old love of nature dead during his outlaw days. For years a horse had been only a machine of locomotion, to carry him from place to place, to beat and spur and goad mercilessly in flight. Now this giant black, with his splendid head, was a companion, a friend, a brother, a love thing, guarded jealously, fed and trained and ridden with an intense appreciation of his great speed and endurance. For years the daytime, with its birth of sunrise on through long hours to the ruddy close, had been used for sleep or rest in some rocky hole or willow brake or deserted hut, had been hated because it augmented danger of pursuit, because it drove the fugitive to lonely, wretched hiding. Now the dawn was a greeting, a promise of another day to ride, to plan, to remember, and sun, wind, cloud, rain, sky, all were joys to him, somehow speaking his freedom. For years the night had been a black space, during which he had to ride unseen along the endless trails, to peer with cat eyes through gloom for the moving shape that ever pursued him. Now the twilight and the dusk and the shadows of grove and canyon darkened into night with its train of stars, and brought him calm reflection of the day's happenings, of the morrow's possibilities, perhaps a sad, brief procession of the old phantoms, then sleep. For years, canyons and valleys and mountains had been looked at as retreats that might be dark and wild enough to hide even an outlaw. Now he saw these features of the great desert with something of the eyes of the boy who had once burned for adventure and life among them. This night a wonderful afterglow lingered along in the west, and against the golden red of clear sky the bold black head of Mount Ord reared itself aloft, beautiful but aloof, sinister yet calling. Small wonder that Duane gazed in fascination upon the peak. Somewhere deep in its corrugated sides, or lost in a rugged canyon, was hidden the secret stronghold of the master outlaw, Cheseldine. All down along the ride from El Paso, Duane had heard of Cheseldine, of his band, his fearful deeds, his cunning, his widely separated raids, of his flitting here and there like a jack-o'-lantern, but never a word of his den, never a word of his appearance. Next morning Duane did not return to Ord. He struck off to the north, riding down a rough, slow-descending road that appeared to have been used occasionally for cattle driving. As he had ridden in from the west, this northern direction led him into totally unfamiliar country. While he passed on, however, he exercised such keen observation that in the future he would know whatever might be of service to him if he chanced that way again. The rough, wild, brush-covered slope down from the foothills gradually leveled out into plain, a magnificent grazing country, upon which till noon of that day Duane did not see a herd of cattle or a ranch. About that time he made out smoke from the railroad, and after a couple of hours' riding he entered a town which inquiry discovered to be Bradford. It was the largest town he had visited since Marfa, and he calculated must have 1,000 or 1,500 inhabitants, not including Mexicans. He decided this would be a good place for him to hold up for a while, being the nearest town to Ord, only 40 miles away. So he hitched his horse in front of a store and leisurely set about studying Bradford. It was after dark, however, that Duane verified his suspicions concerning Bradford. The town was awake after dark, and there was one long row of saloons, dance halls, gambling resorts in full blast. Duane visited them all, and was surprised to see wildness and license equal to that of the old river camp of Badlands in its palmiest days. Here it was forced upon him that the farther west one traveled along the river, the sparser the respectable settlements, the more numerous the hard characters, and in consequence the greater the element of lawlessness. Duane returned to his lodging-house with the conviction that McNally's task of cleaning up the Big Bend country was a stupendous one. Yet, he reflected, A company of intrepid and quick-shooting rangers could have soon cleaned up this Bradford. The innkeeper had one other guest that night, a long, black-coated and wide-sombreroed Texan who reminded Duane of his grandfather. This man had penetrating eyes, a courtly manner, and an unmistakable leaning toward companionship and mint juleps. The gentleman introduced himself as Colonel Webb, of Marfa, and took it as a matter of course that Duane made no comment about himself.
"Sir, it's all one to me," he said blandly, waving his hand. "I have traveled. Texas is free, and this frontier is one where it's healthier and just as friendly for a man to have no curiosity about his companion. You might be Cheseldine of the Big Bend, or you might be Judge Little of El Paso. It's all one to me. I enjoy drinking with you anyway."
Duane thanked him, conscious of a reserve and dignity that he could not have felt or pretended 3 months before. And then, as always, he was a good listener. Colonel Webb told, among other things, that he had come out to the Big Bend to look over the affairs of a deceased brother who had been a rancher and a sheriff of one of the towns, Fairdale by name.
"Found no affairs, no ranch, not even his grave," said Colonel Webb. "And I tell you, sir, if hell's any tougher than this Fairdale, I don't want to expiate my sins there."
"Fairdale?
I imagine sheriffs have a hard row to hoe out there,"
replied Duane, trying not to appear curious. The colonel swore lustily.
"My brother was the only honest sheriff Fairdale ever had. It was wonderful how long he lasted. But he had nerve. He could throw a gun, and he was on the square. Then he was wise enough to confine his work to offenders of his own town and neighborhood. He let the riding outlaws alone, else he wouldn't have lasted at all. What this frontier needs, sir, is about 6 companies of Texas Rangers."
Duane was aware of the colonel's close scrutiny. "Do you know anything about the service?" he asked.
"I used to, 10 years ago when I lived in San Antonio. A fine body of men, sir, and the salvation of Texas."
"Governor Stone doesn't entertain that opinion," said Duane. Here Colonel Webb exploded. Manifestly the governor was not his choice for a chief executive of the great state. He talked politics for a while, and of the vast territory west of the Pecos that seemed never to get a benefit from Austin. He talked enough for Duane to realize that here was just the kind of intelligent, well-informed, honest citizen that he had been trying to meet. He exerted himself thereafter to be agreeable and interesting, and he saw presently that here was an opportunity to make a valuable acquaintance, if not a friend. "I'm a stranger in these parts," said Duane finally. "What is this outlaw situation you speak of?"
"It's damnable, sir, and unbelievable. Not rustling any more, but just wholesale herd stealing, in which some big cattlemen, supposed to be honest, are equally guilty with the outlaws. On this border, you know, the rustler has always been able to steal cattle in any numbers. But to get rid of big bunches, that's the hard job. The gang operating between here and Valentine evidently have not this trouble. Nobody knows where the stolen stock goes. But I'm not alone in my opinion that most of it goes to several big stockmen. They ship to San Antonio, Austin, New Orleans, also to El Paso. If you travel the stock road between here and Marfa and Valentine, you'll see dead cattle all along the line, and stray cattle out in the scrub. The herds have been driven fast and far, and stragglers are not rounded up."
"Wholesale business, eh?" remarked Duane. "Who are these, big stock buyers?" Colonel Webb seemed a little startled at the abrupt query. He bent his penetrating gaze upon Duane and thoughtfully stroked his pointed beard.
"Names, of course, I'll not mention.
Opinions are one thing, direct accusation another. This is not a healthy country for the informer. When it came to the outlaws themselves, Colonel Webb was disposed to talk freely. Duane could not judge whether the colonel had a hobby of that subject, or the outlaws were so striking in personality and deed that any man would know all about them. The great name along the river was Cheseldine, but it seemed to be a name detached from an individual. No person of veracity known to Colonel Webb had ever seen Cheseldine, and those that claimed that doubtful honor varied so diversely in descriptions of the chief that they confused the reality and lent to the outlaw only further mystery. Strange to say of an outlaw leader, as there was no one who could identify him, so there was no one who could prove he had actually killed a man. Blood flowed like water over the Big Bend country, and it was Cheseldine who spilled it. Yet the fact remained there were no eyewitnesses to connect any individual called Cheseldine with these deeds of violence. But in striking contrast to this mystery was the person, character, and cold-blooded action of Poggin and Nell, the chief's lieutenants. They were familiar figures in all the towns within 200 miles of Bradford. Nell had a record, but as a gunman with an incredible list of victims, Poggin was supreme. If Poggin had a friend, no one ever heard of him. There were 100 stories of his nerve, his wonderful speed with a gun, his passion for gambling, his love of a horse, his cold, implacable, inhuman wiping out of his path any man that crossed it. "Cheseldine is a name, a terrible name," said Colonel Webb. "Sometimes I wonder if he's not only a name. In that case, where does the brains of this gang come from? No, there must be a master craftsman behind this border pillage, a master capable of handling those terrors, Poggin and Nell. Of all the thousands of outlaws developed by western Texas in the last 20 years, these 3 are the greatest. In southern Texas, down between the Pecos and the Nueces, there have been and are still many bad men. But I doubt if any outlaw there, possibly excepting Buck Duane, ever equaled Poggin. You heard of this Duane?" "Yes, a little," replied Duane quietly. "I'm from southern Texas. Buck Duane, then, is known out here?" "Why, man, where isn't his name known?" replied Colonel Webb. "I've kept track of his record as I have all the others. Of course, Duane, being a lone outlaw, is somewhat of a mystery also, but not like Cheseldine. Out here there have drifted many stories of Duane, horrible, some of them, but despite them a sort of romance clings to that Nueces outlaw. He's killed 3 great outlaw leaders, I believe, Bland, Hardin, and the other I forgot. Hardin was known in the Big Bend, had friends there. Bland had a hard name at Del Rio." "Then this man Duane enjoys rather an unusual repute west of the Pecos?" inquired Duane. "He's considered more of an enemy to his kind than to honest men. I understand Duane had many friends. That whole county swear by him, secretly, of course, for he's a hunted outlaw with rewards on his head. His fame in this country appears to hang on his matchless gunplay and his enmity toward outlaw chiefs. I've heard many a rancher say, 'I wish to God that Buck Duane would drift out here. I'd give 100 pesos to see him and Poggin meet.' It's a singular thing, stranger, how jealous these great outlaws are of each other." "Yes, indeed, all about them is singular," replied Duane. "Has Cheseldine's gang been busy lately?" "No, this section has been free of rustling for months, though there's unexplained movements of stock. Probably all the stock that's being shipped now was rustled long ago. Cheseldine works over a wide section, too wide for news to travel inside of weeks. Then sometimes he's not heard of at all for a spell. These lulls are pretty surely indicative of a big storm sooner or later. And Cheseldine's deals, as they grow fewer and farther between, certainly get bigger, more daring.
There are some people who think Cheseldine had nothing to do with the bank robberies and train holdups during the last few years in this country. But that's poor reasoning. The jobs have been too well done, too surely covered to be the work of greasers or ordinary outlaws. What's your view of the outlook? How's all this going to wind up? Will the outlaw ever be driven out? Asked Duane. Never. There will always be outlaws along the Rio Grande. All the armies in the world couldn't comb the wild breaks of that 1,500 miles of river. But the sway of the outlaw, such as is enjoyed by these great leaders, will sooner or later be past. The criminal element flocked to the southwest, but not so thick and fast as the pioneers. Besides, the outlaws kill themselves, and the ranchers are slowly rising in wrath, if not in action. That will come soon, if they only had a leader to start the fight. But that will come. There's talk of vigilantes, the same that were organized in California and are now in force in Idaho. So far, it's only talk. But the time will come, and days of Cheseldine and Poggin are numbered. Duane went to bed that night exceedingly thoughtful. The long trail was growing hot. This voluble colonel had given him new ideas. It came to Duane in surprise that he was famous along the upper Rio Grande. Assuredly he would not long be able to conceal his identity. He had no doubt that he would soon meet the chiefs of this clever and bold rustling gang. He could not decide whether he would be safer unknown or known. In the latter case, his one chance lay in the fatality connected with his name, in his power to look it and act it. Duane had never dreamed of any sleuth-hound tendency in his nature, but now he felt something like one. Above all others, his mind fixed on Poggin the brute, the executor of Cheseldine's will, but mostly upon Poggin the gunman. This in itself was a warning to Duane. He felt terrible forces at work within him. There was the stern and indomitable resolve to make McNally's boast good to the governor of the state, to break up Cheseldine's gang. Yet this was not in Duane's mind before a strange, grim, and deadly instinct, which he had to drive away for fear he would find in it a passion to kill Poggin, not for the state, nor for his word to McNally, but for himself. Had his father's blood and the hard years made Duane the kind of man who instinctively wanted to meet Poggin? He was sworn to McNally's service, and he fought himself to keep that, and that only, in his mind. Duane ascertained that Fairdale was situated 2 days' ride from Bradford toward the north. There was a stage which made the journey twice a week. Next morning Duane mounted his horse and headed for Fairdale. He rode leisurely, as he wanted to learn all he could about the country. There were few ranches. The farther he traveled, the better grazing he encountered, and, strange to note, the fewer herds of cattle. It was just sunset when he made out a cluster of adobe houses that marked the halfway point between Bradford and Fairdale. Here, Duane had learned, was stationed a comfortable inn for wayfarers. When he drew up before the inn, the landlord and his family and a number of loungers greeted him laconically. "Beat the stage in, hey?" remarked one. "There she comes now," said another. "Joel sure is driving tonight." Far down the road, Duane saw a cloud of dust and horses and a lumbering coach. When he had looked after the needs of his horse, he returned to the group before the inn. They awaited the stage with that interest common to isolated people. Presently it rolled up, a large, mud-bespattered and dusty vehicle, littered with baggage on top and tied on behind. A number of passengers alighted, 3 of whom excited Duane's interest. One was a tall, dark, striking-looking man, and the other 2 were ladies, wearing long gray ulsters and veils. Duane heard the proprietor of the inn address the man as Colonel Longstreth, and as the party entered the inn, Duane's quick ears caught a few words which acquainted him with the fact that Longstreth was the mayor of Fairdale.
Duane passed inside himself to learn that supper would soon be ready. At table he found himself opposite the three who had attracted his attention.
"Ruth, I envy the lucky cowboys,"
Longstreth was saying. Ruth was a curly-headed girl with gray or hazel eyes.
"I'm crazy to ride broncos," she said.
Duane gathered she was on a visit to western Texas. The other girl's deep voice, sweet like a bell, made Duane regard her closer. She had beauty as he had never seen it in another woman. She was slender, but the development of her figure gave Duane the impression she was 20 years old or more. She had the most exquisite hands Duane had ever seen. She did not resemble the colonel, who was evidently her father. She looked tired, quiet, even melancholy. A finely chiseled oval face, clear olive-tinted skin, long eyes set wide apart and black as coal, beautiful to look into. A slender, straight nose that had something nervous and delicate about it, which made Duane think of a thoroughbred, and a mouth by no means small, but perfectly curved, and hair like jet. All these features proclaimed her beauty to Duane. Duane believed her a descendant of one of the old French families of eastern Texas. He was sure of it when she looked at him, drawn by his rather persistent gaze. There were pride, fire, and passion in her eyes. Duane felt himself blushing in confusion. His stare at her had been rude, perhaps, but unconscious. How many years had passed since he had seen a girl like her? Thereafter he kept his eyes upon his plate, yet he seemed to be aware that he had aroused the interest of both girls. After supper, the guests assembled in a big sitting room where an open fireplace with blazing mesquite sticks gave out warmth and cheery glow. Duane took a seat by a table in the corner, and, finding a paper, began to read. Presently, when he glanced up, he saw two dark-faced men, strangers who had not appeared before, and were peering in from a doorway. When they saw Duane had observed them, they stepped back out of sight. It flashed over Duane that the strangers acted suspiciously. In Texas in the 70s, it was always bad policy to let strangers go unheeded. Duane pondered a moment. Then he went out to look over these two men. The doorway opened into a patio, and across that was a little dingy, dim-lighted bar-room. Here Duane found the innkeeper dispensing drinks to the two strangers. They glanced up when he entered, and one of them whispered. He imagined he had seen one of them before. In Texas, where outdoor men were so rough, bronzed, bold, and sometimes grim of aspect, it was no easy task to pick out the crooked ones. But Duane's years on the border had augmented a natural instinct or gift to read character, or at least to sense the evil in men, and he knew at once that these strangers were dishonest.
"Hey, something?"
one of them asked, leering. Both looked Duane up and down. "No, thanks, I don't drink," Duane replied, and returned their scrutiny with interest. "How's tricks in the Big Bend?" Both men stared. It had taken only a close glance for Duane to recognize a type of ruffian most frequently met along the river. These strangers had that stamp, and their surprise proved he was right. Here the innkeeper showed signs of uneasiness, and seconded the surprise of his customers. No more was said at the instant, and the two rather hurriedly went out. "Say, boss, do you know those fellows?" Duane asked the innkeeper.
"Nope."
"Which way did they come?"
"Now I think of it, them fellers rid in from both corners today,"
he replied, and he put both hands on the bar and looked at Duane. "They noon here, comin' from Bradford, they said, and trailed in after the stage." When Duane returned to the sitting-room, Colonel Longstreth was absent, also several of the other passengers. Miss Ruth sat in the chair he had vacated, and across the table from her sat Miss Longstreth. Duane went directly to them. "Excuse me," said Duane, addressing them. "I want to tell you there are a couple of rough-looking men here. I've just seen them. They mean evil. Tell your father to be careful. Lock your doors. Bar your windows tonight."
"Oh," cried Ruth very low. "Ray, do you hear?"
"Thank you. We'll be careful," said Miss Longstreth gracefully. The rich color had faded in her cheek. "I saw those men watching you from that door. They had such bright black eyes. Is there really danger here?" "I think so," was Duane's reply. Soft, swift steps behind him preceded a harsh voice. "Hands up!" No man quicker than Duane to recognize the intent in those words. His hands shot up. Miss Ruth uttered a little frightened cry and sank into her chair. Miss Longstreth turned white, her eyes dilated. Both girls were staring at someone behind Duane. "Turn around," ordered the harsh voice. The big, dark stranger, the bearded one who had whispered to his comrade in the barroom and asked Duane to drink, had him covered with a cocked gun. He strode forward, his eyes gleaming, pressed the gun against him, and with his other hand dove into his inside coat pocket and tore out his roll of bills. Then he reached low at Duane's hip, felt his gun, and took it. Then he slapped the other hip, evidently in search of another weapon. That done, he backed away, wearing an expression of fiendish satisfaction that made Duane think he was only a common thief, a novice at this kind of game. His comrade stood in the door with a gun leveled at two other men, who stood there frightened, speechless. "Get a move on, Bill," called this fellow, and he took a hasty glance backward. A stamp of hoofs came from outside. Of course the robbers had horses waiting. The one called Bill strode across the room, and with brutal, careless haste began to prod the two men with his weapon and to search them. The robber in the doorway called, "Russell!" and disappeared. Duane wondered where the innkeeper was, and Colonel Longstreth and the other two passengers. The bearded robber quickly got through with his searching, and from his growls Duane gathered he had not been well remunerated. Then he wheeled once more. Duane had not moved a muscle, stood perfectly calm with his arms high. The robber strode back with his bloodshot eyes fastened upon the girls. Miss Longstreth never flinched, but the little girl appeared about to faint. "Don't yap there," he said, low and hard. He thrust the gun close to Ruth. Then Duane knew for sure that he was no knight of the road, but a plain cutthroat robber. Danger always made Duane exult in a kind of cold glow. But now something hot worked within him. He had a little gun in his pocket. The robber had missed it, and he began to calculate chances. "Any money, jewelry, diamonds?" ordered the ruffian fiercely. Miss Ruth collapsed. Then he made at Miss Longstreth. She stood with her hands at her breast. Evidently the robber took this position to mean that she had valuables concealed there, but Duane fancied she had instinctively pressed her hands against a throbbing heart. "Come out with it," he said harshly, reaching for her. "Don't dare touch me!" she cried, her eyes ablaze. She did not move. She had nerve. It made Duane thrill. He saw he was going to get a chance. Waiting had been a science with him, but here it was hard. Miss Ruth had fainted, and that was well. Miss Longstreth had fight in her, which fact helped Duane, yet made injury possible to her. She eluded two lunges the man made at her. Then his rough hand caught her waist, and with one pull ripped it asunder, exposing her beautiful shoulder, white as snow. She cried out. The prospect of being robbed or even killed had not shaken Miss Longstreth's nerve as had this brutal tearing off of half her waist. The ruffian was only turned partially away from Duane. For himself he could have waited no longer, but for her, that gun was still held dangerously upward, close to her. Duane watched only that. Then a bellow made him jerk his head. Colonel Longstreth stood in the doorway in a magnificent rage. He had no weapon. Strange how he showed no fear. He bellowed something again. Duane's shifting glance caught the robber's sudden movement. It was a kind of start. He seemed stricken. Duane expected him to shoot Longstreth. Instead, the hand that clutched Miss Longstreth's torn waist loosened its hold. The other hand, with its cocked weapon, slowly dropped, till it pointed to the floor. That was Duane's chance. Swift as a flash, he drew his gun and fired. Thud went his bullet, and he could not tell on the instant whether it hit the robber or went into the ceiling. Then the robber's gun boomed harmlessly. He fell with blood spurting over his face. Duane realized he had hit him, but the small bullet had glanced. Miss Longstreth reeled and might have fallen had Duane not supported her. It was only a few steps to a couch, to which he half led, half carried her. Then he rushed out of the room, across the patio, through the bar to the yard. Nevertheless, he was cautious. In the gloom stood a saddled horse, probably the one belonging to the fellow he had shot. His comrade had escaped. Returning to the sitting room, Duane found a condition approaching pandemonium. The innkeeper rushed in, pitchfork in hands. Evidently he had been out at the barn. He was now shouting to find out what had happened. Joel, the stage driver, was trying to quiet the men who had been robbed. The woman, wife of one of the men, had come in, and she had hysterics. The girls were still and white. The robber, Bill, lay where he had fallen, and Duane guessed he had made a fair shot after all. And lastly, the thing that struck Duane most of all was Longstreth's rage. He never saw such passion. Like a caged lion, Longstreth stalked and roared. Then came a quieter moment in which the innkeeper shrilly protested. "Man, what are you raving about? Nobody's hurt, and that's lucky. I swear to God I had nothing to do with them fellers." "I ought to kill you anyhow," replied Longstreth, and his voice now astounded Duane, it was so full of power. Upon examination, Duane found that his bullet had furrowed the robber's temple, torn a great piece out of his scalp, and, as Duane had guessed, had glanced. He was not seriously injured, and already shown signs of returning consciousness. "Drag him out of here," ordered Longstreth, and he turned to his daughter. Before the innkeeper reached the robber, Duane had secured the money and gun taken from him, and presently recovered the property of the other men. Joel helped the innkeeper carry the injured man somewhere outside. Miss Longstreth was sitting white but composed upon the couch, where lay Miss Ruth, who evidently had been carried there by the colonel. Duane did not think she had wholly lost consciousness, and now she lay very still, with eyes dark and shadowy, her face pallid and wet. The colonel, now that he finally remembered his womenfolk, seemed to be gentle and kind. He talked soothingly to Miss Ruth, made light of the adventure, said she must learn to have nerve out here where things happened. "Can I be of any service?" asked Duane solicitously. "Thanks. I guess there's nothing you can do. Talk to these frightened girls while I go see what's to be done with that thick-skulled robber," he replied, and telling the girls that there was no more danger, he went out. Miss Longstreth sat with one hand holding her torn waist in place, the other she extended to Duane. He took it awkwardly, and he felt a strange thrill. "You saved my life," she said in grave, sweet seriousness. "No, no," Duane exclaimed. "He might have struck you, hurt you, but no more." "I saw murder in his eyes. He thought I had jewels under my dress. I couldn't bear his touch. The beast, I'd have fought. Surely my life was in peril." "Did you kill him?" asked Miss Ruth, who lay listening. "Oh, no, he's not badly hurt." "I'm very glad he's alive," said Miss Longstreth, shuddering. "My intention was bad enough," Duane went on. "It was a ticklish place for me. You see, he was half drunk, and I was afraid his gun might go off. Fool careless he was." "Yet you say you didn't save me," Miss Longstreth returned quickly. "Well, let it go at that," Duane responded. "I saved you something." "Tell me all about it?" asked Miss Ruth, who was fast recovering. Rather embarrassed, Duane briefly told the incident from his point of view. "Then you stood there all the time with your hands up thinking of nothing?
Watching for nothing except a little moment when you might draw your gun? Asked Miss Ruth.
I guess that's about it, he replied.
Cousin, said Miss Longstreth thoughtfully, it was fortunate for us that this gentleman happened to be here. Papa scouts, laughs at danger. He seems to think there was no danger, yet he raved after it came. Go with us all the way to Fairdale, please? Asked Miss Ruth, sweetly offering her hand. I am Ruth Herbert, and this is my cousin, Ray Longstreth.
I'm traveling that way, replied Duane in great confusion. He did not know how to meet the situation. Colonel Longstreth returned then, and after bidding Duane a good night, which seemed rather curt by contrast to the graciousness of the girls, he led them away. Before going to bed, Duane went outside to take a look at the injured robber, and perhaps to ask him a few questions. To Duane's surprise, he was gone, and so was his horse. The innkeeper was dumbfounded. He said that he left the fellow on the floor in the bar-room. Had he come to? Inquired Duane. Sure, he asked for whiskey. Did he say anything else? Not to me. I heard him talking to the father of them girls. You mean Colonel Longstreth? I reckon. He sure was some riled, wasn't he? Just as if I was to blame for that two-bit of a hold-up. What did you make of the old gent's rage? Asked Duane, watching the innkeeper. He scratched his head dubiously. He was sincere, and Duane believed in his honesty. Well, I'm doggone if I know what to make of it. But I reckon he's either crazy or got more nerve than most Texans. More nerve, maybe, Duane replied. Show me a bed now, innkeeper. Once in bed in the dark, Duane composed himself to think over the several events of the evening. He called up the details of the hold-up and carefully revolved them in mind. The colonel's wrath, under circumstances where almost any Texan would have been cool, nonplussed Duane, and he put it down to a choleric temperament. He pondered long on the action of the robber, when Longstreth's bellow of rage burst in upon him. This ruffian, as bold and mean a type as Duane had ever encountered, had, from some cause or other, been startled. From whatever point Duane viewed the man's strange indecision, he could come to only one conclusion. His start, his check, his fear had been that of recognition. Duane compared this effect with the suddenly acquired sense he had gotten of Colonel Longstreth's powerful personality. Why had that desperate robber lowered his gun and stood paralyzed at sight and sound of the mayor of Fairdale? This was not answerable. There might have been a number of reasons, all to Colonel Longstreth's credit, but Duane could not understand. Longstreth had not appeared to see danger for his daughter, even though she had been roughly handled, and had advanced in front of a cocked gun. Duane probed deep into this singular fact, and he brought to bear on the thing all his knowledge and experience of violent Texas life. And he found that the instant Colonel Longstreth had appeared on the scene, there was no further danger threatening his daughter. Why? That, likewise, Duane could not answer. Then his rage, Duane concluded, had been solely at the idea of his daughter being assaulted by a robber. This deduction was indeed a thought disturber, but Duane put it aside to crystallize and for more careful consideration. Next morning, Duane found that the little town was called Sanderson. It was larger than he had first supposed. He walked up the main street and back again. Just as he arrived, some horsemen rode up to the inn and dismounted, and at this juncture the Longstreth party came out. Duane heard Colonel Longstreth utter an exclamation. Then he saw him shake hands with a tall man. Longstreth looked surprised and angry, and he spoke with force, but Duane could not hear what it was he said. The fellow laughed, yet somehow he struck Duane as sullen, until suddenly he espied Miss Longstreth. Then his face changed, and he removed his sombrero. Duane went closer. "Floyd, did you come with the teams?" asked Longstreth sharply. "Not me.
I rode a horse good and hard,
was the reply. Huh. I have a word to say to you later. Then Longstreth turned to his daughter. Ray, here's the cousin I've told you about. You used to play with him 10 years ago. Floyd Lawson. Floyd, my daughter, and my niece, Ruth Herbert. Duane always scrutinized everyone he met, and now with a dangerous game to play, with the consciousness of Longstreth's unusual and significant personality, he bent a keen and searching glance upon this Floyd Lawson. He was under 30, yet gray at his temples, dark, smooth-shaven, with lines left by wildness, dissipation, shadows under dark eyes, a mouth strong and bitter, and a square chin, a reckless, careless, handsome, sinister face, strangely losing the hardness when he smiled. The grace of a gentleman clung around him, seemed like an echo in his mellow voice. Duane doubted not that he, like many a young man, had drifted out to the frontier, where rough and wild life had wrought sternly, but had not quite effaced the mark of good family. Colonel Longstreth apparently did not share the pleasure of his daughter and his niece in the advent of this cousin. Something hinged on this meeting. Duane grew intensely curious, but, as the stage appeared ready for the journey, he had no further opportunity to gratify it. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey, Chapter 16. Duane followed the stage through the town, out into the open, onto a wide, hard-packed road showing years of travel. It headed northwest. To the left rose a range of low, bleak mountains he had noted yesterday, and to the right sloped the mesquite-patched sweep of ridge and flat. The driver pushed his team to a fast trot, which gait surely covered ground rapidly. The stage made 3 stops in the forenoon, one at a place where the horses could be watered, the second at a chuck wagon belonging to cowboys who were riding after stock, and the third at a small cluster of adobe and stone houses constituting a hamlet the driver called Longstreth, named after the colonel. From that point on to Fairdale, there were only a few ranches, each one controlling great acreage. Early in the afternoon, from a ridge top, Duane sighted Fairdale, a green patch in the mass of gray. For the barrens of Texas it was indeed a fair sight, but he was more concerned with its remoteness from civilization than its beauty. At that time, in the early 70s, when the vast western third of Texas was a wilderness, the pioneer had done wonders to settle there and establish places like Fairdale. It needed only a glance for Duane to pick out Colonel Longstreth's ranch. The house was situated on the only elevation around Fairdale, and it was not high, nor more than a few minutes' walk from the edge of the town. It was a low, flat-roofed structure made of red adobe bricks and covered what appeared to be fully an acre of ground. All was green about it, except where the fenced corrals and numerous barns or sheds showed gray and red. Duane soon reached the shady outskirts of Fairdale and entered the town with mingled feelings of curiosity, eagerness, and expectation. The street he rode down was a main one, and on both sides of the street was a solid row of saloons, resorts, hotels. Saddled horses stood hitched all along the sidewalk in 2 long lines, with a buckboard and team here and there breaking the continuity. This block was busy and noisy. From all outside appearances, Fairdale was no different from other frontier towns, and Duane's expectations were scarcely realized. As the afternoon was waning, he halted at a little inn. A boy took charge of his horse. Duane questioned the lad about Fairdale and gradually drew to the subject most in mind. Colonel Longstreth has a big outfit, eh?
Reckon he has, replied the lad. Don't know how many cowboys. They're always coming and going. I ain't acquainted with half of them.
Much movement of stock these days?
Stock's always moving, he replied with a queer look.
Rustlers? But he did not follow up that look with the affirmative Duane expected. Lively place, I hear, Fairdale is.
Ain't so lively as Sanderson, but it's bigger.
Yes, I heard it was. Fellow down there was talking about 2 cowboys who were arrested.
Sure, I heard all about that. Joe Bean and Brick Higgins. They belong here, but they ain't here much. Longstreth's boys.
Duane did not want to appear over-inquisitive, so he turned the talk into other channels. After getting supper, Duane strolled up and down the main street. When darkness set in, he went into a hotel, bought cigars, sat around and watched. Then he passed out and went into the next place. This was of rough, crude exterior, but the inside was comparatively pretentious and ablaze with lights. It was full of men coming and going, a dusty-booted crowd that smelled of horses and smoke. Duane sat down for a while, with wide eyes and open ears. Then he hunted up the bar, where most of the guests had been or were going. He found a great square room lighted by 6 huge lamps, a bar at one side, and all the floor space taken up by tables and chairs. This was the only gambling place of any size in southern Texas in which he had noted the absence of Mexicans. There was some card-playing going on at this moment. Duane stayed in there for a while, and knew that strangers were too common in Fairdale to be conspicuous. Then he returned to the inn where he had engaged a room. Duane sat down on the steps of the dingy little restaurant. 2 men were conversing inside, and they had not noticed Duane.
Laramie, what's the stranger's name? Asked one.
He didn't say, replied the other.
Sure was a strapping big man. Struck me a little odd, he did. No cattleman, him. How did you size him?
Well, like one of them cool, easy, quiet Texans who's been looking for a man for years, to kill him when he found him.
Right you are, Laramie, and between you and me, I hope he's looking for long...
Shh, interrupted Laramie. You must be half drunk to go talk it that way. Thereafter they conversed in too low a tone for Duane to hear, and presently Laramie's visitor left. Duane went inside, and, making himself agreeable, began to ask casual questions about Fairdale. Laramie was not communicative. Duane went to his room in a thoughtful frame of mind. Had Laramie's visitor meant he hoped someone had come to kill Longstreth? Duane inferred just that from the interrupted remark. There was something wrong about the mayor of Fairdale. Duane felt it. And he felt also, if there was a crooked and dangerous man, it was this Floyd Lawson. The innkeeper Laramie would be worth cultivating. And last in Duane's thoughts that night was Miss Longstreth. He could not help thinking of her, how strangely the meeting with her had affected him. It made him remember that long-past time when girls had been a part of his life. What a sad and dark and endless void lay between that past and the present. He had no right even to dream of a beautiful woman like Ray Longstreth. That conviction, however, did not dispel her. Indeed, it seemed perversely to make her grow more fascinating. Duane grew conscious of a strange, unaccountable hunger, a something that was like a pang in his breast. Next day he lounged about the inn. He did not make any overtures to the taciturn proprietor. Duane had no need of hurry now. He contented himself with watching and listening. And at the close of that day, he decided Fairdale was what McNelly had claimed it to be, and that he was on the track of an unusual adventure. The following day he spent in much the same way, though on one occasion he told Laramie he was looking for a man. The innkeeper grew a little less furtive and reticent after that. He would answer casual queries, and it did not take Duane long to learn that Laramie had seen better days, that he was now broken bitter and hard. Someone had wronged him. Several days passed. Duane did not succeed in getting any closer to Laramie, but he found the idlers on the corners and in front of the stores unsuspicious and willing to talk. It did not take him long to find out that Fairdale stood parallel with Huntsville for gambling, drinking, and fighting. The street was always lined with dusty, saddled horses, the town full of strangers. Money appeared more abundant than in any place Duane had ever visited, and it was spent with the abandon that spoke forcibly of easy and crooked acquirement. Duane decided that Sanderson, Bradford, and Ord were but notorious outposts to this Fairdale, which was a secret center of rustlers and outlaws. And what struck Duane strangest of all was the fact that Longstreth was mayor here and held court daily. Duane knew intuitively, before a chance remark gave him proof, that this court was a sham, a farce, and he wondered if it were not a blind. This wonder of his was equivalent to suspicion of Colonel Longstreth, and Duane reproached himself. Then he realized that the reproach was because of the daughter. Inquiry had brought him the fact that Ray Longstreth had just come to live with her father. Longstreth had originally been a planter in Louisiana, where his family had remained after his advent in the West. He was a rich rancher. He owned half of Fairdale. He was a cattle buyer on a large scale. Floyd Lawson was his lieutenant and associate in deals. On the afternoon of the 5th day of Duane's stay in Fairdale, he returned to the inn from his usual stroll, and upon entering was amazed to have a rough-looking young fellow rush by him out of the door. Inside, Laramie was lying on the floor, with a bloody bruise on his face. He did not appear to be dangerously hurt. "Bo Snecker. He hit me and went after the cash drawer," said Laramie, laboring to his feet. "Are you hurt much?" queried Duane. "I guess not. But Bo needn't to have soaked me. I've been robbed before without that." "Well, I'll take a look after Bo," replied Duane. He went out and glanced down the street toward the center of the town. He did not see anyone he could take for the innkeeper's assailant. Then he looked up the street, and he saw the young fellow about a block away, hurrying along and gazing back. Duane yelled for him to stop and started to go after him. Snecker broke into a run. Then Duane set out to overhaul him. There were two motives in Duane's action, one of anger and the other a desire to make a friend of this man Laramie, whom Duane believed could tell him much. Duane was light on his feet, and he had a giant's stride. He gained rapidly upon Snecker, who, turning this way and that, could not get out of sight. Then he took to the open country and ran straight for the green hill where Longstreth's house stood. Duane had almost caught Snecker when he reached the shrubbery and trees, and there eluded him. But Duane kept him in sight, in the shade, on the paths, and up the road into the courtyard, and he saw Snecker go straight for Longstreth's house. Duane was not to be turned back by that, singular as it was. He did not stop to consider. It seemed enough to know that fate had directed him to the path of this rancher Longstreth. Duane entered the first open door on that side of the court. It opened into a corridor which led into a plaza. It had wide, smooth stone porches, and flowers and shrubbery in the center. Duane hurried through to burst into the presence of Miss Longstreth and a number of young people. Evidently she was giving a little party. Lawson stood leaning against one of the pillars that supported the porch roof. At sight of Duane his face changed remarkably, expressing amazement, consternation, then fear. In the quick ensuing silence, Miss Longstreth rose white as her dress. The young women present stared in astonishment, if they were not equally perturbed. There were cowboys present, who suddenly grew intent and still. By these things Duane gathered that his appearance must be disconcerting. He was panting. He wore no hat or coat. His big gun sheath showed plainly at his hip. Sight of Miss Longstreth had an unaccountable effect upon Duane. He was plunged into confusion. For the moment he saw no one but her. "Miss Longstreth, I came to search your house," panted Duane. He hardly knew what he was saying, yet the instant he spoke he realized that should have been the last thing for him to say. He had blundered. But he was not used to women, and this dark-eyed girl made him thrill, and his heart beat thickly, and his wits go scattering. "Search my house!" exclaimed Miss Longstreth, and red succeeded the white in her cheeks. She appeared astonished and angry. "What for? Why, how dare you? This is unwarrantable." "A man, Bo Snecker, assaulted and robbed Jim Larrabee," replied Duane hurriedly. "I chased Snecker here, saw him run into the house." "Here? Oh, sir, you must be mistaken. We have seen no one. In the absence of my father, I'm mistress here. I'll not permit you to search." Lawson appeared to come out of his astonishment. He stepped forward. "Ray, don't be bothered now," he said to his cousin. "This fellow's making a bluff. I'll settle him. See here, mister, you clear out." "I want Snecker. He's here, and I'm going to get him," replied Duane quietly. "Bah, that's all a bluff," sneered Lawson. "I'm on to your game. You just wanted an excuse to break in here, to see my cousin again. When you saw the company, you invented that excuse. Now be off, or it'll be the worse for you." Duane felt his face burn with a tide of hot blood. Almost he felt that he was guilty of such motive. Had he not been unable to put this Ray Longstreth out of his mind? There seemed to be scorn in her eyes now, and somehow that checked his embarrassment. "Miss Longstreth, will you let me search the house?" he asked. "No." "Then, I regret to say, I'll do so without your permission." "You'll not dare!" she flashed. She stood erect, her bosom swelling. "Pardon me, yes, I will." "Who are you?" she demanded suddenly. "I'm a Texas Ranger," replied Duane. "A Texas Ranger?" she echoed. Floyd Lawson's dark face turned pale. "Miss Longstreth, I don't need warrants to search houses," said Duane. "I'm sorry to annoy you. I'd prefer to have your permission. A ruffian has taken refuge here, in your father's house. He's hidden somewhere. May I look for him?" "If you are indeed a ranger." Duane produced his papers. Miss Longstreth haughtily refused to look at them. "Miss Longstreth, I've come to make Fairdale a safer, cleaner, better place for women and children. I don't wonder at your resentment, but to doubt me, insult me, some day you may be sorry." Floyd Lawson made a violent motion with his hands. "All stuff! Cousin, go on with your party. I'll take a couple of cowboys and go with this Texas Ranger." "Thanks," said Duane coolly as he eyed Lawson. "Perhaps you'll be able to find Snecker quicker than I could." "What do you mean?" demanded Lawson, and now he grew livid. Evidently he was a man of fierce, quick passions. "Don't quarrel," said Miss Longstreth. "Floyd, you go with him. Please hurry. I'll be nervous till the man's found, or you're sure there's not one." They started with several cowboys to search the house. They went through the rooms searching, calling out, peering into dark places. It struck Duane more than forcibly that Lawson did all the calling. He was hurried, too, tried to keep in the lead. Duane wondered if he knew his voice would be recognized by the hiding man. Be that as it might, it was Duane who peered into a dark corner and then, with a gun leveled, said, "Come out." He came forth into the flare, a tall, slim, dark-faced youth, wearing sombrero, blouse, and trousers. Duane collared him before any of the others could move and held the gun close enough to make him shrink. But he did not impress Duane as being frightened just then. Nevertheless, he had a clammy face, the pallid look of a man who had just gotten over a shock. He peered into Duane's face, then into that of the cowboy next to him, then into Lawson's, and if ever in Duane's life he beheld relief, it was then. That was all Duane needed to know, but he meant to find out more if he could. "Who are you?" asked Duane quietly. "Bo Snecker," he said. What did you hide here for?" He appeared to grow sullen.
"Reckon I'd be as safe in Longstreth's as anywheres."
"Ranger, what do you do with him?" Lawson queried, as if uncertain now the capture was made. "I'll see to that," replied Duane, and he pushed Snecker in front of him out into the court. Duane had suddenly conceived the idea of taking Snecker before Mayor Longstreth in the court. When Duane arrived at the hall where court was held, there were other men there, a dozen or more, and all seemed excited. Evidently, news of Duane had preceded him. Longstreth sat at a table up on a platform. Near him sat a thick-set, grizzled man with deep eyes, and this was Hanford Owens, county judge. To the right stood a tall, angular, yellow-faced fellow with a drooping, sandy mustache. Conspicuous on his vest was a huge silver shield. This was Gorsuch, one of Longstreth's sheriffs. There were 4 other men whom Duane knew by sight, several whose faces were familiar, and half a dozen strangers, all dusty horsemen. Longstreth pounded hard on the table to be heard. Mayor or not, he was unable at once to quell the excitement. Gradually, however, it subsided, and from the last few utterances before quiet was restored, Duane gathered that he had intruded upon some kind of a meeting in the hall.
"What did you break in here for?" demanded Longstreth.
"Isn't this the court? Aren't you the mayor of Fairdale?" interrogated Duane. His voice was clear and loud, almost piercing.
"Yes," replied Longstreth. Like flint he seemed, yet Duane felt his intense interest.
"I've arrested a criminal," said Duane.
"Arrested a criminal!" ejaculated Longstreth. "You? Who are you?"
"I'm a ranger," replied Duane. A significant silence ensued. "I charge Snecker with assault on Laramie and attempted robbery, if not murder. He's had a shady past here, as this court will know if it keeps a record."
"What's this I hear about you, Bo? Get up and speak for yourself," said Longstreth gruffly.
Snecker got up, not without a furtive glance at Duane, and he had shuffled forward a few steps toward the mayor. He had an evil front, but not the boldness even of a rustler.
"It ain't so, Longstreth," he began loudly. "I went in Laramie's place for grub. Some feller I never seen before come in from the hall and hit Laramie and wrestled him on the floor. I went out. Then this big ranger chased me and fetched me here. I didn't do nothing. This ranger's hankering to arrest somebody. That's my hunch, Longstreth."
Longstreth said something in an undertone to Judge Owens, and that worthy nodded his great bushy head.
"Bo, you're discharged," said Longstreth bluntly. "Now the rest of you clear out of here."
He absolutely ignored the ranger. That was his rebuff to Duane, his slap in the face to an interfering ranger service. If Longstreth was crooked, he certainly had magnificent nerve. Duane almost decided he was above suspicion. But his nonchalance, his air of finality, his authoritative assurance, these to Duane's keen and practiced eyes were in significant contrast to a certain tenseness of line about his mouth and a slow paling of his olive skin. In that momentary lull, Duane's scrutiny of Longstreth gathered an impression of the man's intense curiosity. Then the prisoner, Snecker, with a cough that broke the spell of silence, shuffled a couple of steps toward the door.
"Hold on,"
called Duane. The call halted Snecker as if it had been a bullet.
"Longstreth, I saw Snecker attack Laramie,"
said Duane, his voice still ringing. "What has the court to say to that?"
"The court has this to say. West of the Pecos will not aid any ranger service. We don't want you out here. Fairdale doesn't need you."
"That's a lie, Longstreth," retorted Duane. "I've letters from Fairdale citizens all begging for ranger service." Longstreth turned white. The veins corded at his temples. He appeared about to burst into rage. He was at a loss for quick reply. Floyd Lawson rushed in and up to the table. The blood showed black and thick in his face. His utterance was incoherent. His uncontrollable outbreak of temper seemed out of all proportion to any cause he should reasonably have had for anger. Longstreth shoved him back with a curse and a warning glance. "Where's your warrant to arrest Snicker?" shouted Longstreth. "I don't need warrants to make arrests. Longstreth, you're ignorant of the power of Texas Rangers." "You'll come none of your damned ranger stunts out here. I'll block you." That passionate reply of Longstreth's was the signal Duane had been waiting for. He had helped on the crisis. He wanted to force Longstreth's hand and show the town his stand. Duane backed clear of everybody. "Men, I call on you all," cried Duane piercingly. "I call on you to witness the arrest of a criminal prevented by Longstreth, mayor of Fairdale. It will be recorded in the report to the Adjutant General at Austin. Longstreth, you'll never prevent another arrest." Longstreth sat white with working jaw. "Longstreth, you've shown your hand," said Duane in a voice that carried far and held those who heard. "Any honest citizen of Fairdale can now see what's plain. Yours is a damn poor hand. You're going to hear me call a spade a spade. In the 2 years you've been mayor, you've never arrested one rustler. Strange, when Fairdale's a nest for rustlers. You've never sent a prisoner to Del Rio, let alone to Austin. You have no jail. There have been 9 murders during your office, innumerable street fights and hold-ups. Not one arrest. But you have ordered arrests for trivial offenses, and have punished these out of all proportion. There have been lawsuits in your court, suits over water rights, cattle deals, property lines. Strange how in these lawsuits you or Lawson or other men close to you were always involved. Strange how it seems the law was stretched to favor your interest." Duane paused in his cold, ringing speech. In the silence, both outside and inside the hall, could be heard the deep breathing of agitated men. Longstreth was indeed a study. Yet did he betray anything but rage at this interloper? "Longstreth, here's plain talk for you and Fairdale," went on Duane. "I don't accuse you and your court of dishonesty. I say strange. Law here has been a farce. The motive behind all this laxity isn't plain to me, yet, but I call your hand." End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey, Chapter 17. Duane left the hall, elbowed his way through the crowd, and went down the street. He was certain that on the faces of some men he had seen ill-concealed wonder and satisfaction. He had struck some kind of a hot trait, and he meant to see where it led. It was by no means unlikely that Cheseldine might be at the other end. Duane controlled a mounting eagerness, but ever and anon it was shot through with a remembrance of Ray Longstreth. He suspected her father of being not what he pretended. He might, very probably would, bring sorrow and shame to this young woman. The thought made him smart with pain. She began to haunt him, and then he was thinking more of her beauty and sweetness than of the disgrace he might bring upon her. Some strange emotion, long locked inside Duane's heart, not to be heard, to be let out. He was troubled. Upon returning to the inn, he found Laramie there, apparently none the worse for his injury. "How are you, Laramie?" he asked.
"Reckon I'm feeling as well as could be expected,"
replied Laramie. His head was circled by a bandage that did not conceal the lump where he had been struck. He looked pale, but was bright enough. "That was a good crack Snicker gave you," remarked Duane. I ain't accusing Bo, remonstrated Laramie, with eyes that made Duane thoughtful. Well, I accuse him. I caught him, took him to Longstreth's court, but they let him go. Laramie appeared to be agitated by this intimation of friendship. See here, Laramie, went on Duane. In some parts of Texas, it's policy to be close-mouthed, policy and health-preserving. Between ourselves, I want you to know I lean on your side of the fence. Laramie gave a quick start. Presently, Duane turned and frankly met his gaze. He had startled Laramie out of his habitual set taciturnity, but even as he looked, the light that might have been amaze and joy faded out of his face, leaving it the same old mask. Still, Duane had seen enough. Like a bloodhound, he had a scent. Talking about work, Laramie, who'd you say Snecker worked for? I didn't say. Well, say so now, can't you? Laramie, you're powerful peevish today. It's that bump on your head. Who does Snecker work for? When he works at all, which sure ain't often, he rides for Longstreth. Huh. Seems to me that Longstreth's the whole circus round Fairdale. I was some sore the other day to find I was losing good money at Longstreth's faro game. Sure, if I'd won, I wouldn't have been sore. But I was surprised to hear someone say Longstreth owned the Hope So joint. He owns considerable property hereabouts, replied Laramie, constrainedly. Humph again. Laramie, like every other fellow I met in this town, you're afraid to open your trap about Longstreth. Get me straight, Laramie. I don't care a damn for Colonel Mayor Longstreth, and for cause I'd throw a gun on him just as quick as on any rustler in Pecos. Talk's cheap, replied Laramie, making light of his bluster, but the red was deeper in his face. Sure, I know that, Duane said, and usually I don't talk. Then it's not well known that Longstreth owns the Hope So? Reckon it's known in Pecos, all right. But Longstreth's name isn't connected with the Hope So. Blandy runs the place. That Blandy. His faro game's crooked, or I'm a locoed bronc. Not that we don't have lots of crooked faro dealers. A fellow can stand for them. But Blandy's mean, backhanded, never looks you in the eyes. That Hope So place ought to be run by a good fellow like you, Laramie. Thanks, replied he, and Duane imagined his voice a little husky. Didn't you hear I used to run it? No, did you? Duane said quickly. I reckon. I built the place, made additions twice, owned it for 11 years. Well, I'll be doggoned. It was indeed Duane's turn to be surprised, and with the surprise came a glimmering. I'm sorry you're not there now. Did you sell out? No, I just lost the place. Laramie was bursting for relief now, to talk, to tell. Sympathy had made him soft. It was 2 years ago, 2 years, last March, he went on. I was in a big cattle deal with Longstreth. We got the stock, and my share, 1,800 head, was rustled off. I owed Longstreth. He pressed me. It come to a lawsuit, and I was ruined. It hurt Duane to look at Laramie. He was white, and tears rolled down his cheeks. Duane saw the bitterness, the defeat, the agony of the man. He had failed to meet his obligations. Nevertheless, he had been swindled. All that he suppressed, all that would have been passion had the man's spirit not been broken, lay bare for Duane to see. He had now the secret of his bitterness. But the reason he did not openly accuse Longstreth, the secret of his reticence and fear, these Duane thought best to try to learn at some later time. Hard luck. It certainly was tough, Duane said, but you're a good loser, and the wheel turns. Now, Laramie, Here's what. I need your advice. I've got a little money, but before I lose it, I want to invest some. Buy some stock or buy an interest in some rancher's herd. What I want you to steer me on is a good square rancher, or maybe a couple of ranchers, if there happen to be two honest ones. No deals with ranchers who ride in the dark with rustlers. I've a hunch Fairdale is full of them. Now, Laramie, you've been here for years. Sure, you must know a couple of men above suspicion.
Thank God I do, he replied feelingly. Frank Morton and Si Zimmer, my friends and neighbors all my prosperous days, and friends still. You can gamble on Frank and Si, but if you want advice from me, don't invest money in stock now.
Why?
Because any new feller buying stock these days will be rustled quicker than he can say Jack Robinson. The pioneers, the new cattlemen, these are easy picking for the rustlers. Lord knows all the ranchers are easy enough picking, but the new fellers have to learn the ropes. They don't know anything or anybody, and the old ranchers are wise and sore. They'd fight if they...
What? Duane put in as he paused. If they knew who was rustling the stock?
Nope.
If they had the nerve?
Not that so much.
What then? What'd make them fight?
A leader. Hold her thar, Jim,
boomed a big voice. A man of great bulk with a ruddy, merry face entered the room.
Hello, Morton,
replied Laramie.
I'd introduce you to my guest here, but I don't know his name.
Ho, that's all right. Few men out here go by their right names.
Say, Morton, put in Duane, Laramie gave me a hunch you'd be a good man to tie to. Now, I've a little money, and before I lose it, I'd like to invest it in stock. Morton smiled broadly. I'm on the square, Duane said bluntly. If you fellows never size up your neighbors any better than you have sized me, well, you won't get any richer. It was enjoyment for Duane to make his remarks to these men, pregnant with meaning. Morton showed his pleasure, his interest, but his faith held aloof. I've got some money. Will you let me in on some kind of deal? Will you start me up as a stockman with a little herd all my own?
Well, stranger, to come out flat-footed, you'd be foolish to buy cattle now. I don't want to take your money and see you lose out. Better you go back across the Pecos where the rustlers ain't so strong. I haven't got more'n 2,500 herd of stock for 10 years. The rustlers let me hang on to a breeding herd. Kind of them, ain't it?
Sort of kind. All I hear is rustlers, Morton, replied Duane with impatience. You see, I haven't ever lived long in a rustler-run county. Who heads the gang, anyway? Morton looked at Duane with a curiously amused smile, then snapped his big jaw as if to shut in impulsive words. Look here, Morton. It stands to reason, no matter how strong these rustlers are, how hidden their work, however involved with supposedly honest men, they can't last.
They come with the pioneers, and they'll last till there's a single steer left, he declared.
Well, if you take that view of circumstances, I just figure you as one of the rustlers. Morton looked as if he was about to brain Duane with the butt of his whip. His anger flashed by then, evidently as unworthy of him, and something striking him as funny, he boomed out a laugh. It's not so funny, Duane went on. If you're going to pretend a yellow streak, what else will I think?
Pretend, he repeated.
Sure, I know men of nerve, and here they're not any different from those in other places. I say if you show anything like a lack of sand, it's all bluff. By nature, you've got nerve. There are a lot of men around Fairdale who are afraid of their shadows, afraid to be out after dark, afraid to open their mouths. But you're not one. So I say if you claim these rustlers will last, you're pretending lack of nerve just to help the popular idea along. For they can't last. What you need out here is some new blood. Savvy what I mean?
Well, I reckon I do, he replied, looking as if a storm had blown over him. Stranger, I'll look you up the next time I come to town.
Then he went out. Laramie had eyes like flint striking fire. He breathed a deep breath and looked around the room before his gaze fixed again on Duane.
Well, he replied, speaking low, you picked the right men. Now, who in the hell are you?
Reaching into the inside pocket of his buckskin vest, Duane turned the lining out. A star-shaped bright silver object flashed as he shoved it, pocket and all, under Jim's hard eyes. "Ranger," he whispered, cracking the table with his fist. "You sure ring true to me." "Laramie, do you know who's boss of this secret gang of rustlers hereabouts?" asked Duane bluntly. It was characteristic of him to come sharp to the point. His voice, something deep, easy, cool about him, seemed to steady Laramie. "No," replied Laramie. "Does anybody know?" went on Duane. "Well, I reckon there's not one honest native who knows." "But you have your suspicions." "We have." "Give me your idea about this crowd that hangs round the saloons, the regulars." "Just a bad lot," replied Laramie, with a quick assurance of knowledge. "Most of them have been here years. Others have drifted in. Some of them work at odd times. They rustle a few steers, steal, rob, anything for a little money to drink and gamble. Just a bad lot." "Have you any idea whether Cheseldine and his gang are associated with this gang here?"
"Lord knows. I've always suspected them the same gang. None of us ever seen Cheseldine, and that's strange when Nell, Poggin, Panhandle Smith, Blossom Kane, and Fletcher, they all ride here often."
"No, Poggin doesn't come often, but the others do. For that matter, they're all over west of the Pecos." "Now I'm puzzled over this," said Duane. "Why do men, apparently honest men, seem to be so close-mouthed here? Is that a fact or only my impression?"
"It's a sure fact," replied Laramie darkly. "Men have lost cattle and property in Fairdale, lost them honestly or otherwise, as hasn't been proved. And in some cases, when they talked, hinted a little, they was found dead. Apparently held up and robbed, but dead. Dead men don't talk. That's why we're close-mouthed."
Duane felt a dark, somber sternness. Rustling cattle was not intolerable. Western Texas had gone on prospering, growing in spite of the hordes of rustlers ranging its vast stretches. But a cold, secret, murderous hold on a little struggling community was something too strange, too terrible for men to stand long. The ranger was about to speak again when the clatter of hoofs interrupted him. Horses halted out in front, and one rider got down. Floyd Lawson entered. He called for tobacco. If his visit surprised Laramie, he did not show any evidence, but Lawson showed rage as he saw the stranger, and then a dark glint flitted from the eyes that shifted from Duane to Laramie and back again. Duane leaned easily against the counter.
"Say, that was a bad break of yours," Lawson said. "If you come fooling around the ranch again, there'll be hell."
It seemed strange that a man who had lived west of the Pecos for 10 years could not see in Duane something which forbade that kind of talk. It certainly was not nerve Lawson showed. Men of courage were seldom intolerant. With the matchless nerve that characterized the great gunmen of the day, there was a cool, unobtrusive manner, a speech brief, almost gentle, certainly courteous. Lawson was a hot-headed Louisianan of French extraction, a man, evidently, who had never been crossed in anything, and who was strong, brutal, passionate, which qualities in the face of a situation like this made him simply a fool.
I'm saying again, you used your ranger bluff just to get near Ray Longstreth, Lawson sneered. Mind you, if you come up there again, there'll be hell.
You're right, but not the kind you think, Duane retorted, his voice sharp and cold.
Ray Longstreth wouldn't stoop to know a dirty blood tracker like you, said Lawson hotly.
He did not seem to have a deliberate intention to rouse Duane. The man was simply rancorous, jealous.
I'll call you right, you cheap bluffer, you four-flush, you damned interfering, conceited ranger.
Lawson, I'll not take offense, because you seem to be championing your beautiful cousin, replied Duane in slow speech. But let me return your compliment. You're a fine Southerner. Why, you're only a cheap four-flush, damned, bull-headed rustler. Duane hissed the last word. Then for him there was the truth in Lawson's working, passion-blackened face. Lawson jerked, moved, meant to draw. But how slow! Duane lunged forward. His long arms swept up, and Lawson staggered backward, knocking table and chairs, to fall hard in a half-sitting posture against the wall. Don't draw, warned Duane.
Lawson, get away from your gun,
yelled Laramie. But Lawson was crazed with fury. He tugged at his hip, his face corded with purple welts, malignant, murderous. Duane kicked the gun out of his hand. Lawson got up, raging, and rushed out. Laramie lifted his shaking hands.
What did you wing him for? He wailed. He was drawing on you. Kicking men like him won't do out here.
That bull-headed fool will roar and butt himself with all his gang right into our hands. He's just the man I've needed to meet. Besides, shooting him would have been murder.
Murder?
Exclaimed Laramie. Yes, for me, replied Duane.
That may be true, whoever you are, but if Lawson's the man you think he is, he'll begin that secret underground business. Why, Lawson won't sleep of nights now. He and Longstreth have always been after me.
Laramie, what are your eyes for? Demanded Duane.
Watch out.
And now here, see your friend Morton. Tell him this game grows hot. Together you approach 4 or 5 men you know well and can absolutely trust. I may need your help. Then Duane went from place to place, corner to corner, bar to bar, watching, listening, recording. The excitement had preceded him, and speculation was rife. He thought best to keep out of it. After dark he stole up to Longstreth's ranch. The evening was warm, the doors were open, and in the twilight the only lamps that had been lit were in Longstreth's big sitting room at the far end of the house. When a buckboard drove up and Longstreth and Lawson alighted, Duane was well hidden in the bushes, so well screened that he could get but a fleeting glimpse of Longstreth as he went in. For all Duane could see, he appeared to be a calm and quiet man, intense beneath the surface, with an air of dignity under insult. Duane's chance to observe Lawson was lost. They went into the house without speaking, and closed the door. At the other end of the porch, close under a window, was an offset between step and wall, and there in the shadow Duane hid. So Duane waited, there in the darkness, with patience born of many hours of hiding. Presently a lamp was lit, and Duane heard the swish of skirts.
"Something happened, surely, Ruth," he heard Miss Longstreth say anxiously. "Papa just met me in the hall and didn't speak. He seemed pale, worried." "Cousin Floyd looked like a thundercloud," said Ruth. "For once he didn't try to kiss me. Something's happened. Well, Ray, this had been a bad day."
"Oh, dear. Ruth, what can we do? These are wild men.
Floyd makes life miserable for me, and he teases you unmercifully. I don't call it teasing. Floyd wants to spoon, declared Ruth emphatically. He'd run after any woman. A fine compliment to me, Cousin Ruth, laughed Ray. I don't care, replied Ruth stubbornly. It's so. He's mushy, and when he's been drinking and tries to kiss me, I hate him. There were steps on the hall floor. Hello, girls, sounded out Lawson's voice, minus its usual gaiety. Floyd, what's the matter? Asked Ray presently. I never saw Papa as he is tonight, nor you so worried. Tell me, what has happened? Well, Ray, we had a jar today, replied Lawson with a blunt, expressive laugh. Jar? Echoed both the girls curiously. We had to submit to a damnable outrage, added Lawson passionately, as if the sound of his voice augmented his feeling. Listen, girls, I'll tell you all about it. He coughed, cleared his throat in a way that betrayed he had been drinking. Duane sunk deeper into the shadow of his covert, and, stiffening his muscles for a protected spell of rigidity, prepared to listen with all acuteness and intensity. Just one word from this Lawson, inadvertently uttered in a moment of passion, might be the word Duane needed for his clue. It happened in the town hall, began Lawson rapidly. Your father and Judge Owens and I were there in consultation with 3 ranchers from out of town. Then that damned ranger stalked in dragging Snecker, the fellow who hid here in the house. He had arrested Snecker for alleged assault on a restaurant keeper named Laramie. Snecker being obviously innocent, he was discharged. Then this ranger began shouting his insults. Law was a farce in Fairdale. The court was a farce. There was no law. Your father's office as mayor should be impeached. He made arrests only for petty offenses. He was afraid of the rustlers, highwaymen, and murderers. He was afraid, or he just let them alone. He used his office to cheat ranchers and cattlemen in lawsuits. All this the ranger yelled for everyone to hear. A damnable outrage. Your father, Ray, insulted in his own court by a rowdy ranger. Oh, cried Ray Longstreth in mingled distress and anger. The ranger service wants to rule western Texas, went on Lawson. These rangers are all a low set, many of them worse than the outlaws they hunt. Some of them were outlaws and gunfighters before they became rangers. This is one of the worst of the lot. He's keen, intelligent, smooth, and that makes him more to be feared. For he is to be feared. He wanted to kill. He would kill. If your father had made the least move, he would have shot him. He's a cold-nerved devil, the born gunman. My God, any instant I expected to see your father fall dead at my feet. Oh, Floyd, the unspeakable ruffian, cried Ray Longstreth passionately. You see, Ray, this fella, like all rangers, seeks notoriety. He made that play with Snecker just for a chance to rant against your father. He tried to inflame all Fairdale against him. That about the lawsuits was the worst. Damn him. He'll make us enemies. What do you care for the insinuations of such a man? Said Ray Longstreth, her voice now deep and rich with feeling. After a moment's thought, no one will be influenced by them. Do not worry, Floyd. Tell Papa not to worry. Surely after all these years he can't be injured in reputation by an adventurer. Yes, he can be injured, replied Floyd quickly. The frontier is a queer place. There are many bitter men here, men who have failed at ranching, and your father has been wonderfully successful. The ranger has dropped poison, and it'll spread. End of chapter.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey. Chapter 18. The strangers rode into Fairdale, and other hard-looking customers, new to Duane if not to Fairdale, helped to create a charged and waiting atmosphere. The saloons did unusual business and were never closed. Respectable citizens of the town were awakened in the early dawn by rowdies carousing in the streets. Duane kept pretty close under cover during the day. He did not entertain the opinion that the first time he walked down street he would be a target for guns. Things seldom happened that way, and when they did happen so, it was more accident than design. But at night he was not idle. He met Laramie, Morton, Zimmer, and others of like character. A secret club had been formed, and all the members were ready for action. Duane spent hours at night watching the house where Floyd Lawson stayed when he was not up at Longstreth's. At night he was visited, or at least the house was, by strange men who were swift, stealthy, mysterious, all that kindly disposed friends or neighbors would not have been. Duane had not been able to recognize any of these night visitors, and he did not think the time was right for a bold holding up of one of them. Nevertheless, he was sure such an event would discover Lawson, or someone in that house, to be in touch with crooked men. Laramie was right. Not 24 hours after his last talk with Duane, in which he advised quick action, he was found behind the little bar of his restaurant with a bullet hole in his breast, dead. No one could be found who had heard a shot. It had been deliberate murder, for upon the bar had been left a piece of paper rudely scrawled with a pencil. All friends of Rangers look for the same. This roused Duane. His first move, however, was to bury Laramie. None of Laramie's neighbors evinced any interest in the dead man or the unfortunate family he had left. Duane saw that these neighbors were held in check by fear. Mrs. Laramie was ill. The shock of her husband's death was hard on her, and she had been left almost destitute with 5 children. Duane rented a small adobe house on the outskirts of town and moved the family into it. Then he played the part of provider and nurse and friend. After several days, Duane went boldly into town and showed that he meant business. It was his opinion that there were men in Fairdale secretly glad of a ranger's presence. What he intended to do was food for great speculation. A company of militia could not have had the effect upon the wild element of Fairdale that Duane's presence had. It got out that he was a gunman lightning swift on the draw. It was death to face him. He had killed 30 men, wildest rumor of all. It was actually said of him he had the gun skill of Buck Duane or of Poggin. At first there had not only been great conjecture among the vicious element, but also a very decided checking of all kinds of action calculated to be conspicuous to a keen-eyed ranger. At the tables, at the bars and lounging places, Duane heard the remarks, "Who's that ranger after? What'll he do first off? Is he waiting for somebody? Who's going to draw on him first and go to hell? Just about how soon will he be found somewheres full of lead?" When it came out somewhere that Duane was openly cultivating the honest stay-at-home citizens to array themselves in time against the other element, then Fairdale showed its wolf teeth. Several times Duane was shot at in the dark, and once slightly injured. Rumor had it that Poggin, the gunman, was coming to meet him. But the lawless element did not rise up in a mass to slay Duane on sight. It was not so much that the enemies of the law awaited his next move, but just a slowness peculiar to the frontier. The ranger was in their midst. He was interesting, if formidable. He would have been welcomed at card tables, at the bars, to play and drink with the men who knew they were under suspicion. There was a rude kind of good humor even in their open hostility. Besides, one ranger, or a company of rangers, could not have held the undivided attention of these men from their games and drinks and quarrels, except by some decided move. Excitement, greed, appetite were rife in them. Duane marked, however, a striking exception to the usual run of strangers he had been in the habit of seeing. Snecker had gone, or was under cover. Again Duane caught a vague rumor of the coming of Poggin, yet he never seemed to arrive. Moreover, the goings-on among the habitués of the resorts and the cowboys who came in to drink and gamble were unusually mild in comparison with former conduct. This lull, however, did not deceive Duane. It could not last. The wonder was that it had lasted so long. Duane went often to see Mrs. Laramie and her children. One afternoon, while he was there, he saw Miss Longstreth and Ruth ride up to the door. They carried a basket. Evidently they had heard of Mrs. Laramie's trouble. Duane felt strangely glad, but he went into an adjoining room rather than meet them.
"Mrs. Laramie, I've come to see you," said Miss Longstreth cheerfully.
The little room was not very light, there being only one window and the doors, but Duane could see plainly enough. Mrs. Laramie lay, hollow-cheeked and haggard, on a bed. Once she had evidently been a woman of some comeliness. The ravages of trouble and grief were there to read in her worn face. It had not, however, any of the hard and bitter lines that had characterized her husband's. Duane wondered, considering that Longstreth had ruined Laramie, how Mrs. Laramie was going to regard the daughter of an enemy. "So you're Granger Longstreth's girl?" queried the woman, with her bright black eyes fixed on her visitor.
"Yes," replied Miss Longstreth simply. "This is my cousin, Ruth Herbert. We've come to nurse you, take care of the children, help you in any way you'll let us."
There was a long silence.
"Well, you look a little like Longstreth," finally said Mrs. Laramie, "but you're not at all like him. You must take after your mother. Miss Longstreth, I don't know if I can, if I ought to accept anything from you. Your father ruined my husband." "Yes, I know," replied the girl sadly. "That's all the more reason you should let me help you. Pray don't refuse. It will mean so much to me."
If this poor stricken woman had any resentment, it speedily melted in the warmth and sweetness of Miss Longstreth's manner. Duane's idea was that the impression of Ray Longstreth's beauty was always swiftly succeeded by that of her generosity and nobility. At any rate, she had started well with Mrs. Laramie, and no sooner had she begun to talk to the children than both they and the mother were won. The opening of that big basket was an event. Poor, starved little beggars. Duane's feelings seemed too easily roused. Hard indeed would it have gone with Jim Laramie's slayer if he could have laid eyes on him then. However, Miss Longstreth and Ruth, after the nature of tender and practical girls, did not appear to take the sad situation to heart. The havoc was wrought in that household. The needs now were cheerfulness, kindness, help, action, and these the girls furnished with a spirit that did Duane good.
"Mrs. Laramie, who dressed this baby?" presently asked Miss Longstreth.
Duane peeped in to see a dilapidated youngster on her knee. That sight, if any other was needed, completed his full and splendid estimate of Ray Longstreth, and wrought strangely upon his heart.
"The Ranger?" replied Mrs. Laramie. "The Ranger!" exclaimed Miss Longstreth. "Yes, he's taken care of us all since... Mrs. Laramie choked. "Oh, so you've had no help but his," replied Miss Longstreth hastily. "No women. Too bad. I'll send someone, Mrs. Laramie, and I'll come myself." "It'll be good of you," went on the older woman. "You see, Jim had few friends, that is, right in town, and they've been afraid to help us. Afraid they get what poor Jim—" "That's awful!" burst out Miss Longstreth passionately. "A brave lot of friends. Mrs. Laramie, don't you worry any more. We'll take care of you. Here, Ruth, help me. Whatever is the matter with baby's dress?"
Manifestly, Miss Longstreth had some difficulty in subduing her emotion.
"Why, it's on the hind side before," declared Ruth. "I guess Mr. Ranger hasn't dressed many babies."
"He did the best he could," said Mrs. Laramie. "Lord only knows what would have become of us."
"Then he is something more than a ranger?" queried Miss Longstreth with a little break in her voice.
"He's more than I can tell," replied Mrs. Laramie. "He buried Jim. He paid our debts. He fetched us here. He bought food for us. He cooked for us and fed us. He washed and dressed the baby. He sat with me the first 2 nights after Jim's death, when I thought I'd die myself. He's so kind, so gentle, so patient. He has kept me up just by being near. Sometimes I'd wake from a doze, and seeing him there, I'd know how false were all these tales Jim heard about him and believed at first. Why, he plays with the children just like any good man might. When he has the baby up, I just can't believe he's a bloody gunman, as they say. He's good, but he isn't happy. He has such sad eyes. He looks far off sometimes when the children climb round him. They love him. His life is sad. Nobody need tell me. He sees the good in things. Once he said somebody had to be a ranger. Well, I say, thank God for a ranger like him." Duane did not want to hear more, so he walked into the room. "It was thoughtful of you," Duane said. "Womenkind are needed here. I could do so little. Mrs. Laramie, you look better already. I'm glad. And here's Baby, all clean and white. Baby, what a time I had trying to puzzle out the way your clothes went on. Well, Mrs. Laramie, didn't I tell you? Friends would come. So will the brighter side." "Yes, I've more faith than I had," replied Mrs. Laramie. "Granger Longstreth's daughter has come to me. There for a while after Jim's death I thought I'd sink. We have nothing. How could I ever take care of my little ones? But I'm gaining courage to—" "Mrs. Laramie, do not distress yourself any more," said Miss Longstreth. "I shall see you are well cared for, I promise you." "Miss Longstreth, that's fine," exclaimed Duane. "It's what I'd have expected of you." It must have been sweet praise to her, for the whiteness of her face burned out in a beautiful blush. "And it's good of you, too, Miss Herbert, to come," added Duane. "Let me thank you both. I'm glad I have you girls as allies in part of my lonely task here. More than glad for the sake of this good woman and the little ones. But both of you be careful about coming here alone. There's risk. And now I'll be going. Goodbye, Mrs. Laramie. I'll drop in again tonight. Goodbye."
"Mr. Ranger, wait,"
called Miss Longstreth as he went out. She was white and wonderful. She stepped out of the door close to him.
"I have wronged you," she said impulsively.
"Miss Longstreth, how can you say that?" he returned.
"I believed what my father and Floyd Lawson said about you. Now I see. I wronged you."
"You make me very glad. But, Miss Longstreth, please don't speak of wronging me. I have been a gunman. I am a ranger, and much said of me is true. My duty is hard on others, sometimes on those who are innocent, alas. But God knows that duty is hard, too, on me."
"I did wrong you. If you entered my home again, I would think it an honor.
Please don't, Miss Longstreth," interrupted Duane.
"But, sir, my conscience flays me," she went on. There was no other sound like her voice. "Will you take my hand? Will you forgive me?"
She gave it royally, while the other was there pressing at her breast. Duane took the proffered hand. He did not know what else to do. Then it seemed to dawn upon him that there was more behind this white, sweet, noble intensity of her than just making amends for a fancied or real wrong. Duane thought the man did not live on earth who could have resisted her then. "I honor you for your goodness to this unfortunate woman," she said, and now her speech came swiftly. "When she was all alone and helpless, you were her friend. It was the deed of a man. But Mrs. Laramie isn't the only unfortunate woman in the world. I, too, am unfortunate. Ah, how I may soon need a friend. Will you be my friend? I'm so alone. I'm terribly worried. I fear. Oh, surely I'll need a friend soon. Oh, I'm afraid of what you'll find out sooner or later. I want to help you. Let us save life, if not honor. Must I stand alone? All alone? Will you be?" Her voice failed. It seemed to Duane that she must have discovered what he had begun to suspect, that her father and Lawson were not the honest ranchers they pretended to be. Perhaps she knew more. Her appeal to Duane shook him deeply. He wanted to help her more than he had ever wanted anything, and with the meaning of the tumultuous sweetness she stirred in him there came the realization of a dangerous situation. "I must be true to my duty," he said hoarsely. "If you knew me, you'd know I could never ask you to be false to it." "Well, then, I'll do anything for you." "Oh, thank you. I'm ashamed that I believed my cousin Floyd. He lied. I'm all in the dark, strangely distressed. My father wants me to go back home. Floyd is trying to keep me here. They've quarreled. Oh, I know something dreadful will happen. I know I'll need you if... Will you help me?" "Yes," replied Duane, and his look brought the blood to her face. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey. Chapter 19. After supper, Duane stole out for his usual evening spying. The night was dark, without starlight, and a stiff wind rustled the leaves. Duane bent his steps toward the Longstreth's ranch house. He had so much to think about that he never knew where the time went. This night, when he reached the edge of the shrubbery, he heard Lawson's well-known footsteps and saw Longstreth's door open, flashing a broad bar of light in the darkness. Lawson crossed the threshold, the door closed, and all was dark again outside. Not a ray of light escaped from the window. Little doubt there was that this talk with Longstreth would be interesting to Duane. He tiptoed to the door and listened, but could only hear a murmur of voices. Besides, that position was too risky. He went around the corner of the house. This side of the big adobe house was of much older construction than the back and larger part. There was a narrow passage between the houses, leading from the outside through to the patio. This passage now afforded Duane an opportunity, and he decided to avail himself of it in spite of the very great danger. Crawling on very stealthily, he got under the shrubbery to the entrance of the passage. In the blackness, a faint streak of light showed the location of a crack in the wall. He had to slip in sidewise. It was a tight squeeze, but he entered without the slightest noise. As he progressed, the passage grew a very little wider in that direction, and that fact gave rise to the thought that in case of a necessary and hurried exit, he would do best by working toward the patio. It seemed a good deal of time was consumed in reaching a vantage point. When he did get there, the crack he had marked was a foot over his head. There was nothing to do but find toe holes in the crumbling walls, and by bracing these on one side, back against the other, hold himself up. Once with his eye there, he did not care what risk he ran. Longstreth appeared disturbed. He sat stroking his mustache. His brow was clouded. Lawson's face seemed darker, more sullen, yet lighted by some indomitable resolve.
"We'll settle both deals tonight," Lawson was saying. "That's what I came for."
"But suppose I don't choose to talk here," protested Longstreth impatiently.
"I never before made my house a place to—" "We've waited long enough. This place is as good as any. You've lost your nerve since that ranger hit the town. First now, will you give Ray to me?"
"Floyd, you talk like a spoiled boy.
Give Ray to you? Why, she's a woman, and I'm finding out that she's got a mind of her own. I told you I was willing for her to marry you. I tried to persuade her, but Ray hasn't any use for you now. She liked you at first, but now she doesn't. So what can I do?" "You can make her marry me," replied Lawson.
"Make that girl do what she doesn't want to?
It couldn't be done, even if I tried. And I don't believe I'll try. I haven't the highest opinion of you as a prospective son-in-law, Floyd. But if Ray loved you, I would consent. We'd all go away together before this damned miserable business is out. Then she'd never know. And maybe you might be more like you used to be before the West ruined you. But as matters stand, you fight your own game with her. And I'll tell you now, you'll lose." "What'd you want to let her come out here for?" demanded Lawson hotly. "It was a dead mistake. I've lost my head over her. I'll have her or die. Don't you think if she was my wife I'd soon pull myself together? Since she's come, we've none of us been right, and the gang has put up a holler. No, Longstreth, we got to settle things tonight."
"Well, we can't settle what Ray's concerned in right now," replied Longstreth, rising.
"Come on, we'll ask her. See where you stand."
They went out, leaving the door open. Duane dropped down to rest himself and to wait. He would have liked to hear Miss Longstreth's answer, but he could guess what it would be. Lawson appeared to be all Duane had thought him, and he believed he was going to find out presently that he was worse. The men seemed to be absent a good while, though that feeling might have been occasioned by Duane's thrilling interest and anxiety. Finally he heard heavy steps. Lawson came in alone. He was leaden-faced, humiliated. Then something abject in him gave place to rage. He strode the room. He cursed. Then Longstreth returned, now appreciably calmer. Duane could not but decide that he felt relief at the evident rejection of Lawson's proposal. "Don't fuss about it, Floyd," he said. "You see I can't help it. We're pretty wild out here, but I can't rope my daughter and give her to you as I would an unruly steer." "Longstreth, I can make her marry me," declared Lawson thickly. "How?" "You know the hold I got on you, the deal that made you boss of this rustler gang?" "It isn't likely I'd forget," replied Longstreth grimly. "I can go to Ray, tell her that, make her believe I'd tell it broadcast, tell this ranger, unless she'd marry me." Lawson spoke breathlessly, with haggard face and shadowed eyes. He had no shame. He was simply in the grip of passion. Longstreth gazed with dark, controlled fury at this relative. In that look Duane saw a strong, unscrupulous man fallen into evil ways, but still a man. It betrayed Lawson to be the wild and passionate weakling. Duane seemed to see also how during all the years of association this strong man had upheld the weak one. But that time had gone forever, both in intent on Longstreth's part and impossibility. Lawson, like the great majority of evil and unrestrained men on the border, had reached a point where influence was futile. Reason had degenerated. He saw only himself. "But Floyd, Ray's the one person on earth who must never know I'm a rustler, a thief, a red-handed ruler of the worst gang on the border," replied Longstreth impressively. Floyd bowed his head at that, as if the significance had just occurred to him, but he was not long at a loss.
She's going to find it out sooner or later. I tell you, she knows now there's something wrong out here. She's got eyes. Mark what I say.
Ray has changed, I know, but she hasn't any idea yet that her daddy's a boss rustler. Ray is concerned about what she calls my duty as mayor. Also, I think she's not satisfied with my explanations in regard to certain property. Lawson halted in his restless walk and leaned against the stone mantelpiece. He had his hands in his pockets. He squared himself as if this was his last stand. He looked desperate, but on the moment showed an absence of his usual nervous excitement.
Longstreth, that may well be true, he said. No doubt all you say is true, but it doesn't help me. I want the girl. If I don't get her, I reckon we'll all go to hell.
He might have meant anything, probably meant the worst. He certainly had something more in mind. Longstreth gave a slight start, barely perceptible, like the switch of an awakening tiger. He sat there, head down, stroking his mustache. Almost Duane saw his thought. He had long experience in reading men under stress of such emotion. He had no means to vindicate his judgment, but his conviction was that Longstreth right then and there decided that the thing to do was to kill Lawson. For Duane's part, he wondered that Longstreth had not come to such a conclusion before. Not improbably, the advent of his daughter had put Longstreth in conflict with himself. Suddenly he threw off a somber cast of countenance, and he began to talk. He talked swiftly, persuasively, yet Duane imagined he was talking to smooth Lawson's passion for the moment. Lawson no more caught the fateful significance of a line crossed, a limit reached, a decree decided than if he had not been present. He was obsessed with himself. How, Duane wondered, had a man of his mind ever lived so long and gone so far among the exacting conditions of the Southwest? The answer was, perhaps, that Longstreth had guided him, upheld him, protected him. The coming of Ray Longstreth had been the entering wedge of dissension. "You're too impatient," concluded Longstreth. "You'll ruin any chance of happiness if you rush Ray. She might be won. If you told her who I am, she'd hate you forever. She might marry you to save me, but she'd hate you. That isn't the way. Wait. Play for time. Be different with her. Cut out your drinking. She despises that. Let's plan to sell out here. Stock, ranch, property, and leave the country. Then you'd have a show with her."
"I told you we've got to stick," growled Lawson. "The gang won't stand for our going. It can't be done unless you want to sacrifice everything."
"Do you mean double-cross the men? Go without their knowing? Leave them here to face whatever comes?"
"I mean just that."
"I'm bad enough, but not that bad," returned Longstreth. "If I can't get the gang to let me off, I'll stay and face the music. All the same, Lawson, did it ever strike you that most of the deals the last few years have been yours?"
"Yes. If I hadn't rung them in there, there wouldn't have been any. You have cold feet, and especially since this ranger has been here."
"Well, call it cold feet if you like, but I call it sense. We reached our limit long ago. We began by rustling a few cattle, at a time when rustling was laughed at. But as our greed grew, so did our boldness. Then came the gang, the regular trips, the one thing and another till, before I knew it, we had shady deals, hold-ups, and murders on our record. Then we had to go on. Too late to turn back."
"I reckon we've all said that. None of the gang wants us to quit. They all think we can't be touched. We may be blamed, but nothing can be proved. We're too strong."
"That's where you're dead wrong,"
rejoined Longstreth emphatically. I imagined that once, not long ago. I was bullheaded. Who would ever connect Granger Longstreth with a rustler gang? I've changed my mind. I've begun to think. I've reasoned out things. We're crooked, and we can't last. It's the nature of life, even here, for conditions to grow better. The wise deal for us would be to divide equally and leave the country, all of us. But you and I have all the stock, all the gain, protested Lawson. I'll split mine. I won't. That settles that, added Lawson instantly. Longstreth spread wide his hands as if it was useless to try to convince this man. Talking had not increased his calmness, and he now showed more than impatience. A dull glint gleamed deep in his eyes. Your stock and property will last a long time. Do you lots of good when this ranger— Bah! Hoarsely croaked Lawson. The ranger's name was a match applied to powder. Haven't I told you he'd be dead soon? Any time, same as Laramie is? Yes, you mentioned the supposition, replied Longstreth sarcastically. I inquired, too, just how that very desired event was to be brought about. The gang will lay him out. Bah! Retorted Longstreth in turn. He laughed contemptuously. Floyd, don't be a fool. You've been on the border for 10 years. You've packed a gun and you've used it. You've been with rustlers when they killed their men. You've been present at many fights. But you never, in all that time, saw a man like this ranger. You haven't got sense enough to see him right if you had a chance. Neither have any of you. The only way to get rid of him is for the gang to draw on him all at once. Then he's going to drop some of them. Longstreth, you say that like a man who wouldn't care much if he did drop some of them, declared Lawson, and now he was sarcastic. To tell you the truth, I wouldn't, returned the other bluntly. I'm pretty sick of this mess. Lawson cursed in amazement. His emotions were all out of proportion to his intelligence. He was not at all quick-witted. Duane had never seen a vainer or more arrogant man. Longstreth, I don't like your talk, he said. If you don't like the way I talk, you know what you can do, replied Longstreth quickly. He stood up then, cool and quiet, with flash of eyes and set of lips that told Duane he was dangerous. Well, after all, that's neither here nor there, went on Lawson, unconsciously cowed by the other. The thing is, do I get the girl? Not by any means except her consent. You'll not make her marry me? No, replied Longstreth, his voice still cold, low-pitched. All right, then I'll make her. Evidently Longstreth understood the man before him so well that he wasted no more words. Duane knew what Lawson never dreamed of, and that was that Longstreth had a gun somewhere within reach and meant to use it. Then heavy footsteps sounded outside, tramping upon the porch. Duane might have been mistaken, but he believed those footsteps saved Lawson's life. There they are, said Lawson, and he opened the door. 5 masked men entered. They all wore coats hiding any weapons. A big man with burly shoulders shook hands with Longstreth, and the others stood back. The atmosphere of that room had changed. Lawson might have been a nonentity for all he counted. Longstreth was another man, a stranger to Duane. If he had entertained a hope of freeing himself from this band, of getting away to a safer country, he abandoned it at the very sight of these men. There was power here, and he was bound. The big man spoke in low, hoarse whispers, and at this all the others gathered around him close to the table. There were evidently some signs of membership not plain to Duane. Then all the heads were bent over the table. Low voices spoke, queried, answered, argued. By straining his ears, Duane caught a word here and there. They were planning, and they were brief.
Duane gathered that they were to have a rendezvous at or near Ord. Then the big man, who evidently was the leader of the present convention, got up to depart. He went as swiftly as he had come, and was followed by his comrades. Longstreth prepared for a quiet smoke. Lawson seemed uncommunicative and unsociable. He smoked fiercely and drank continually. All at once he straightened up, as if listening. "What's that?" he called suddenly. Duane's strained ears were pervaded by a slight rustling sound. "Must be a rat," replied Longstreth. The rustle became a rattle. "Sounds like a rattlesnake to me," said Lawson. Longstreth got up from the table and peered around the room. Just at that instant, Duane felt an almost inappreciable movement of the adobe wall which supported him. He could scarcely credit his senses, but the rattle inside Longstreth's room was mingling with dull little thuds of falling dirt. The adobe wall, merely dried mud, was crumbling. Duane distinctly felt a tremor pass through it. Then the blood gushed back to his heart. "What in the hell?" exclaimed Longstreth. "I smell dust," said Lawson sharply. That was the signal for Duane to drop down from his perch, yet despite his care he made a noise. "Did you hear a step?" queried Longstreth. No one answered, but a heavy piece of the adobe wall fell with a thud. Duane heard it crack, felt it shake. "There's somebody between the walls," thundered Longstreth. Then a section of the wall fell inward with a crash. Duane began to squeeze his body through the narrow passage toward the patio. "Hear him!" yelled Lawson. "This side!" "No, he's going that way!" yelled Longstreth. The tramp of heavy boots led Duane the strength of desperation. He was not shirking a fight, but to be cornered like a trapped coyote was another matter. He almost tore his clothes off in that passage. The dust nearly stifled him. When he burst into the patio, it was not a single instant too soon, but one deep gasp of breath revived him, and he was up, gun in hand, running for the outlet into the court. Thumping footsteps turned him back. While there was a chance to get away, he did not want to fight. He thought he heard someone running into the patio from the other end. He stole along, and coming to a door without any idea of where it might lead, he softly pushed it open a little way and slipped in. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey. Chapter 20. A low cry greeted Duane. The room was light. He saw Ray Longstreth sitting on her bed in her dressing gown. With a warning gesture to her to be silent, he turned to close the door. It was a heavy door without bolt or bar, and when Duane had shut it he felt safe only for the moment. Then he gazed around the room. There was one window with blind closely drawn. He listened and seemed to hear footsteps retreating, dying away. Then Duane turned to Miss Longstreth. She had slipped off the bed, half to her knees, and was holding out trembling hands. She was as white as the pillow on her bed. She was terribly frightened. Again, with warning hand commanding silence, Duane stepped softly forward, meaning to reassure her. "Oh!" she whispered, wildly, and Duane thought she was going to faint. When he got close and looked into her eyes, he understood the strange, dark expression in them. She was terrified because she believed he meant to kill her, or do worse, probably worse. Duane realized he must have looked pretty hard and fierce bursting into her room with that big gun in hand. The way she searched Duane's face with doubtful, fearful eyes hurt him. "Listen, I didn't know this was your room.
I came here to get away, to save my life. I was pursued. I was spying on your father and his men. They heard me, but did not see me. They don't know who was listening. They're after me now." Her eyes changed from blank gulfs to dilating, shadowing, quickening windows of thought. Then she stood up and faced Duane with the fire and intelligence of a woman in her eyes. "Tell me now, you were spying on my father?" Briefly, Duane told her what had happened before he entered her room, not omitting a terse word as to the character of the men he had watched. "My God! So it's that. I knew something was terribly wrong here, with him, with the place, the people. And right off I hated Floyd Lawson. Oh, it'll kill me if... It's so much worse than I dreamed. What shall I do?" The sound of soft steps somewhere near distracted Duane's attention, reminded him of her peril, and now, what counted more with him, made clear the probability of being discovered in her room.
"I'll have to get out of here,"
whispered Duane.
"Wait," she replied. "Didn't you say there was hunting for you?"
"They sure are,"
he returned grimly.
"Oh, then you mustn't go. They might shoot you before you got away. Stay. If we hear them, you can hide. I'll turn out the light. I'll meet them at the door. You can trust me. Wait till all quiets down. If we have to wait till morning, then you can slip out."
"I oughtn't to stay. I don't want to." "I won't,"
Duane replied, perplexed and stubborn.
"But you must. It's the only safe way. They won't come here."
"Suppose they should. It's an even chance Longstreth will search every room and corner in this old house. If they found me here, I couldn't start a fight. You might be hurt. Then, the fact of my being here..." Duane did not finish what he meant, but instead made a step toward the door. White of face and dark of eye, she took hold of him to detain him. She was as strong and supple as a panther. But she need not have been either resolute or strong, for the clasp of her hand was enough to make Duane weak. "Up yet, Ray?" came Longstreth's clear voice, too strained, too eager to be natural.
"No, I'm in bed reading. Good night,"
instantly replied Miss Longstreth, so calmly and naturally that Duane marveled at the difference between man and woman. Then she motioned for Duane to hide in the closet. He slipped in, but the door would not close altogether. "Are you alone?" went on Longstreth's penetrating voice.
"Yes," she replied. "Ruth went to bed."
The door swung inward with a swift scrape and jar. Longstreth half entered, haggard, flaming-eyed. Behind him Duane saw Lawson, and indistinctly another man. Longstreth barred Lawson from entering, which action showed control as well as distrust. He wanted to see into the room. When he had glanced around, he went out and closed the door. Then what seemed a long interval ensued. The house grew silent once more. Duane could not see Miss Longstreth, but he heard her quick breathing. How long did she mean to let him stay hidden there? Hard and perilous as his life had been, this was a new kind of adventure. He had divined the strange softness of his feeling as something due to the magnetism of this beautiful woman. It hardly seemed possible that he, who had been outside the pale for so many years, could have fallen in love. Yet that must be the secret of his agitation. Presently he pushed open the closet door and stepped forth. Miss Longstreth had her head lowered upon her arms and appeared to be in distress. At his touch, she raised a quivering face.
"I think I can go now, safely," he whispered.
"Go then if you must, but you may stay till you're safe," she replied.
I couldn't thank you enough. It's been hard on me, this finding out. And you, his daughter. I feel strange. I don't understand myself well. But I want you to know, if I were not an outlaw, a ranger, I'd lay my life at your feet."
"Oh, you've seen so little of me,"
she faltered. All the same, it's true, and that makes me feel more the trouble my coming caused you. You will not fight my father? Not if I can help it. I'm trying to get out of his way. But you spied upon him. I am a ranger, Miss Longstreth. And, oh, I am a rustler's daughter, she cried. That's so much more terrible than I suspected. It was tricky cattle deals I imagined he was engaged in, but only tonight I had strong suspicions aroused. How? Tell me. I overheard Floyd say that men were coming tonight to arrange a meeting for my father at a rendezvous near Ord. Father did not want to go. Floyd taunted him with a name. What name? Queried Duane. It was Cheseldine. Cheseldine? My God! Miss Longstreth, why did you tell me that? What difference does that make? Your father and Cheseldine are one and the same, whispered Duane hoarsely. I gathered so much myself, she replied miserably, but Longstreth is father's real name. Duane felt so stunned he could not speak at once. It was the girl's part in this tragedy that weakened him. The instant she betrayed the secret, Duane realized perfectly that he did love her. The emotion was like a great flood. Miss Longstreth, all this seems so unbelievable, he whispered. Cheseldine is the rustler chief I've come out here to get. He's only a name. Your father is the real man. I've sworn to get him. I'm bound by more than law or oaths. I can't break what binds me, and I must disgrace you, wreck your life. Why, Miss Longstreth, I believe I love you. It's all come in a rush. I'd died for you if I could. How fatal, terrible this is. How things work out. She slipped to her knees with her hands on his. You won't kill him, she implored. If you care for me, you won't kill him? No, that I promise you. With a low moan, she dropped her head upon the bed. Duane opened the door and stealthily stole out through the corridor to the court. When Duane got out into the dark, where his hot face cooled in the wind, his relief equaled his other feelings. The night was dark, windy, stormy, yet there was no rain. Duane hoped as soon as he got clear of the ranch to lose something of the pain he felt, but long after he had tramped out into the open there was a lump in his throat and an ache in his breast. All his thought centered around Ray Longstreth. What a woman she had turned out to be. He seemed to have a vague, hopeless hope that there must be some way he could save her. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Lone Star Ranger by Zane Grey, Chapter 21. Before going to sleep that night, Duane had decided to go to Ord and try to find the rendezvous where Longstreth was to meet his men. These men Duane wanted even more than their leader. If Longstreth, or Cheseldine, was the brains of that gang, Poggin was the executor. It was Poggin who needed to be found and stopped. Poggin and his right-hand men. Duane experienced a strange, tigerish thrill. It was thought of Poggin more than thought of success for McNally's plan. Duane felt dubious over this emotion. Next day he set out for Bradford. He was glad to get away from Fairdale for a while, but the hours and the miles in no wise changed the new pain in his heart. The only way he could forget Miss Longstreth was to let his mind dwell upon Poggin, and even this was not always effective. He avoided Sanderson, and at the end of the day and a half he arrived at Bradford. The night of the day before he reached Bradford, number 6, the mail and express train going east, was held up by train robbers. The Wells Fargo messenger killed over his safe, the mail clerk wounded, the bags carried away. The engine of number 6 came into town minus even a tender, and engineer and fireman told conflicting stories. A posse of railroad men and citizens, led by a sheriff Duane suspected was crooked, was made up before the engine steamed back to pick up the rest of the train. Duane had the sudden inspiration that he had been cudgeling his mind to find, and, acting upon it, he mounted his horse again and left Bradford unobserved. As he rode out into the night, over a dark trail in the direction of Ord, he uttered a short, grim, sardonic laugh at the hope that he might be taken for a train robber. He rode at an easy trot most of the night, and when the black peak of Ord Mountain loomed up against the stars, he halted, tied his horse, and slept until dawn. He had brought a small pack, and now he took his time cooking breakfast. When the sun was well up, he saddled Bullet, and, leaving the trail where his tracks showed plain in the ground, he put his horse to the rocks and brush. He selected an exceedingly rough, roundabout, and difficult course to Ord, hid his tracks with the skill of a long-hunted fugitive, and arrived there with his horse winded and covered with lather. It added considerable to his arrival that the man Duane remembered as Fletcher and several others saw him come in the back way through the lots and jump a fence into the road. Duane led Bullet up to the porch where Fletcher stood wiping his beard. He was hatless, vestless, and evidently had just enjoyed a morning drink.
"Howdy, Dodge,"
said Fletcher laconically. Duane replied, and the other man returned the greeting with interest.
"Jim, my hoss is done up. I want to hide him from any chance tourists as might happen to ride up, curious-like."
"Haw, haw, haw!"
Duane gathered encouragement from that chorus of coarse laughter.
"Well, if them tourists ain't too dern snooky, the hoss'll be safe in the 'dobe shack back of Bill's here. Feed thar, too, but you'll have to rustle water."
Duane led Bullet to the place indicated, had care of his welfare, and left him there. Upon returning to the tavern porch, Duane saw the group of men had been added to by others, some of whom he had seen before. Without comment, Duane walked along the edge of the road, and wherever one of the tracks of his horse showed, he carefully obliterated it. This procedure was attentively watched by Fletcher and his companions.
"Well, Dodge,"
remarked Fletcher as Duane returned,
"that's safer than praying for rain."
Duane's reply was a remark as loquacious as Fletcher's, to the effect that a long, slow, monotonous ride was conducive to thirst. They all joined him, unmistakably friendly. But Nell was not there, and most assuredly not Poggin. Fletcher was no common outlaw, but whatever his ability, it probably lay in execution of orders. Apparently at that time these men had nothing to do but drink and lounge around the tavern. Evidently they were poorly supplied with money, though Duane observed they could borrow a peso occasionally from the bartender. Duane set out to make himself agreeable, and succeeded. There was card-playing for small stakes, idle jests of coarse nature, much bantering among the younger fellows, and occasionally a mild quarrel. All morning men came and went, until, all told, Duane calculated he had seen at least 50. Toward the middle of the afternoon, a young fellow burst into the saloon and yelled one word, "Posse!" From the scramble to get outdoors, Duane judged that word and the ensuing action was rare in Ord.
"What the hell?"
muttered Fletcher as he gazed down the road at a dark, compact bunch of horses and riders.
"First time I ever seen that in Ord. We're getting popular like them camps out of Valentine. Wish Phil was here, or Pocky. Now all of you gents keep quiet. I'll do the talking."
The posse entered the town, trotted up on dusty horses, and halted in a bunch before the tavern. The party consisted of about 20 men, all heavily armed, and evidently in charge of a clean-cut, lean-limbed cowboy. Duane experienced considerable satisfaction at the absence of the sheriff, who he had understood was to lead the posse. Perhaps he was out in another direction with a different force.
"Hello, Jim Fletcher," called the cowboy. "Howdy," replied Fletcher.
At his short, dry response and the way he strode leisurely out before the posse, Duane found himself modifying his contempt for Fletcher. The outlaw was different now.
"Fletcher, we've tracked a man to all but 3 miles of this place. Tracks as plain as the nose on your face. Found his camp. Then he hit into the brush and we lost his trail. Didn't have no tracker with us. Think he went into the mountains. But we took a chance and rid over the rest of the way, seeing Ord was so close. Anybody coming here late last night or early this morning?"
"Nope," replied Fletcher. His response was what Duane had expected from his manner, and evidently the cowboy took it as a matter of course. He turned to the others of the posse, entering into a low consultation. Evidently there was difference of opinion, if not real dissension, in that posse.
"Didn't I tell you this was a wild goose chase coming way out here?"
protested an old hawk-faced rancher.
"Them hoss tracks we follered ain't like any of them we seen at the water tank where the train was held up." "I'm not so sure of that," replied the leader. "Well, Guthrie, I've follered tracks all my life." "But you couldn't keep to the trail this feller made in the brush." "Give me time, and I could. That takes time. And here you go hell-bent for election. But it's a wrong lead out this way. If you're right, this road agent, after he killed his pals, would have rid back right through town. And with them mailbags, supposing they was greasers. Some greasers have sense, and when it comes to thieving, they sure cute." "But we ain't got any reason to believe this robber who murdered the greasers is a greaser himself. I tell you, it was a slick job done by no ordinary sneak. Didn't you hear the facts? One greaser hopped the engine and covered the engineer and fireman. Another greaser kept flashing his gun outside the train. The big man who shoved back the car door and did the killing, he was the real gent, and don't you forget it." Some of the posse sided with the cowboy leader and some with the old cattleman. Finally, the young leader disgustedly gathered up his bridle. "Aw, hell. That sheriff shoved you off this trail. Maybe he had reasons. Savvy that? If I had a bunch of cowboys with me, I tell you what, I'd take a chance and clean up this hole." All the while, Jim Fletcher stood quietly with his hands in his pockets. "Guthrie, I'm sure treasuring up your friendly talk," he said. The menace was in the tone, not the content of his speech. "You can, and be damned to you, Fletcher," called Guthrie as the horses started. Fletcher, standing out alone before the others of his clan, watched the posse out of sight. "Luck for you all that Poggy wasn't here," he said as they disappeared. Then, with a thoughtful mien, he strode up on the porch and led Duane away from the others into the barroom. When he looked into Duane's face, it was somehow an entirely changed scrutiny. "Dodge, where'd you hide the stuff? I reckon I get in on this deal, seeing I staved off Guthrie." Duane played his part. As he was a tiger after prey, he seized it. First he coolly eyed the outlaw, and then disclaimed any knowledge whatever of the train robbery other than Fletcher had heard himself. Then, at Fletcher's persistence and admiration and increasing show of friendliness, he laughed occasionally and allowed himself to swell with pride, though still denying. Next he feigned a lack of consistent willpower and seemed to be wavering under Fletcher's persuasion, and grew silent, then surly. Fletcher, evidently sure of ultimate victory, desisted for the time being.
However, in his solicitous regard and close companionship for the rest of that day, he betrayed the bent of his mind. Later, when Duane started up, announcing his intention to get his horse and make for camp out in the brush, Fletcher seemed grievously offended. "Why don't you stay with me? I've got a comfortable doby over here. Didn't I stick by you when Guthrie and his bunch come up? Supposing I hadn't showed down a cold hand to him. You'd be swinging somewheres now. I tell you, Dodge, it ain't square." "I'll square it. I pay my debts," replied Duane, "but I can't put up here all night. If I belonged to the gang, it'd be different." "What gang?" asked Fletcher bluntly. "Why, Cheseldine's." Fletcher's beard nodded as his jaw dropped. Duane laughed. "I run into him the other day. Knowed him on sight. Sure, he's the kingpin rustler. When he seen me and asked me what reason I had for being on Earth, or some such like, why, I up and told him." Fletcher appeared staggered. "Who in all fired hell are you talking about?" "Didn't I tell you once? Cheseldine. He calls himself Longstreth over there." All of Fletcher's face, not covered by hair, turned a dirty white. "Cheseldine? Longstreth?" he whispered hoarsely. "God Almighty! You braced the—" Then a remarkable transformation came over the outlaw. He gulped. He straightened his face. He controlled his agitation. But he could not send the healthy brown back into his face. Duane, watching this rude man, marveled at the change in him, the sudden checking movement, the proof of a wonderful fear and loyalty. It all meant Cheseldine, a master of men. "Who are you?" queried Fletcher in a queer, strained voice. "You gave me a handle, didn't you? Dodge. That's as good as any. Sure, it hits me hard. Jim, I've been pretty lonely for years, and I'm getting in need of pals. Think it over, will you? See you mañana." The outlaw watched Duane go off after his horse, watched him as he returned to the tavern, watched him ride out into the darkness, all without a word. Duane left the town, threaded a quiet passage through cactus and mesquite to a spot he had marked before, and made ready for the night. His mind was so full that he found sleep aloof. Luck at last was playing his game. He sensed the first slow heave of a mighty crisis. The end, always haunting, had to be sternly blotted from thought. It was the approach that needed all his mind. He passed the night there, and late in the morning, after watching trail and road from a ridge, he returned to Ord. If Jim Fletcher tried to disguise his surprise, the effort was a failure. Certainly he had not expected to see Duane again. Duane allowed himself a little freedom with Fletcher, an attitude hitherto lacking. That afternoon a horseman rode in from Bradford, an outlaw evidently well known and liked by his fellows, and Duane heard him say, before he could possibly have been told the train robber was in Ord, that the loss of money in the hold-up was slight. Like a flash, Duane saw the luckless report. He pretended not to have heard. In the early twilight, at an opportune moment, he called Fletcher to him, and, linking his arm within the outlaw's, he drew him off in a stroll to a log bridge spanning a little gully. Here, after gazing around, he took out a roll of bills, spread it out, split it equally, and without a word handed one half to Fletcher. With clumsy fingers, Fletcher ran through the roll. "$500!" he exclaimed. "Dodge, that's damn handsome of you, considering the job wasn't—" "Considering nothing," interrupted Duane. "I'm making no reference to a job here or there. You did me a good turn. I split my pile. If that doesn't make us pards, good turns and money ain't no use in this country." Fletcher was won. The two men spent much time together. Duane made up a short, fictitious history about himself that satisfied the outlaw, only it drew forth a laughing jest upon Duane's modesty. For Fletcher did not hide his belief that this new partner was a man of achievements, Nell and Poggin, and then Cheseldine himself would be persuaded of this fact, so Fletcher boasted. He had influence. He would use it. He thought he pulled a stroke with Nell, but nobody on earth, not even the boss, had any influence on Poggin. Poggin was concentrated ice part of the time. All the rest he was bursting hell. But Poggin loved a horse. He never loved anything else. He could be won with that black horse Bullet. Cheseldine was already won by Duane's monumental nerve. Otherwise, he would have killed Duane. Little by little the next few days, Duane learned the points he longed to know, and how indelibly they etched themselves in his memory. Cheseldine's hiding place was on the far slope of Mount Ord, in a deep, high-walled valley. He always went there just before a contemplated job, where he met and planned with his lieutenants. Then, while they executed, he basked in the sunlight before one or another of the public places he owned. He was there in the Ord den now, getting ready to plan the biggest job yet. It was a bank robbery, but where, Fletcher had not as yet been advised. Then, when Duane had pumped the now amenable outlaw of all details pertaining to the present, he gathered data and facts and places covering a period of 10 years. Fletcher had been with Cheseldine. And herewith was unfolded a history so dark in its bloody regime, so incredible in its brazen daring, so appalling in its proof of the outlaw's sweep and grasp of the country from Pecos to Rio Grande, that Duane was stunned. Compared to this Cheseldine of the Big Bend, to this rancher, stock buyer, cattle speculator, property holder, all the outlaws Duane had ever known sank into insignificance. The power of the man stunned Duane. The strange fidelity given him stunned Duane. The intricate inside working of his great system was equally stunning. But when Duane recovered from that, the old terrible passion to kill consumed him, and it raged fiercely, and it could not be checked. If that red-handed Poggin, if that cold-eyed, dead-faced Nell had only been at Ord, but they were not, and Duane, with help of time, got what he hoped was the upper hand of himself. End of chapter.